Hello my friends, tonight we're stepping into the brutal world of ancient Sparta, a place where weakness wasn't just frowned upon, it was eliminated. Get ready to find out why surviving as a Spartan was a lot harder than the movies make it look. It's the year 480 BC. The Persian Empire is huge and scary. Greece is just a bunch of small city-states trying not to get crushed. And right in the middle of all this is Sparta. Probably the most feared society in the ancient world. You've just been born into this warrior society. Great news, right? Well, not so fast. Most babies get a cute little hat and some cuddly toys when they're born. Spartan babies? They get inspected like they're fruit at the market. And trust me, the Spartans were very picky shoppers. Within days of your birth, the village elders gather around to check you out. They're not there to coo over how cute you are. They're there to decide if you get to live. Yes, you heard that right. In Sparta, your first challenge wasn't learning to walk or talk. It was proving you deserved to breathe their air. These old men, who've survived countless battles and seen enough blood to fill an ocean, look you over with cold eyes. They're checking for any sign of weakness or defect. Too small? Problem. Oddly shaped limb? Problem. Don't cry loud enough? Believe it or not, also a problem. Spartans wanted their babies to have strong lungs and a fighting spirit from day one. If these elders decide you don't meet their standards for strength and perfection, they don't send you to some special care facility. They don't even bother with a polite rejection letter. Instead, you're taken to a place called Apothetae, near Mount Taygetus, which is basically a fancy way of saying a cold, rocky slope where unwanted babies are left to die. That's right. If you fail your first test in Sparta, you become wolf food, and you don't even get to write a complaint about poor customer service. Imagine that. In our world, 2-day-old babies struggle to keep their eyes open. In Sparta, they're already fighting for their lives. Talk about starting your education early. So let's say you pass this first brutal test. The elders nod in approval. You get to live, but don't get too comfortable. This wasn't some one-time assessment. The Spartans didn't just want strong babies, they wanted tough ones too. Your mother isn't allowed to coddle you. No warm, comfy blankets. No gentle rocking when you cry. Spartan babies were bathed in wine, not warm water. They believed this would somehow test your strength and harden your little baby body. It's like they were marinating you for a life of toughness. Crying too much? Too bad. Nobody's rushing to comfort you. Spartans believed that responding to a baby's cries made them weak. So while babies in Athens and other Greek cities were being sung lullabies, Spartan babies were basically being told to suck it up. Your crib? Not soft and cosy. Spartan babies slept on hard surfaces because comfort was considered the enemy of strength. Sure, modern science tells us babies need comfort and security to develop properly. But Sparta wasn't big on child psychology research. As a toddler, things don't get much better. While kids in other societies were playing with toys and learning nursery rhymes, Spartan toddlers were already being conditioned for a life of hardship. Play wasn't just play, it was preparation for war. By the age of 5, you're expected to sit through adult meals without complaining. And these weren't happy family dinners with everyone sharing stories about their day. These were serious affairs where children were seen but rarely heard, unless they had something clever to say. And here's a fun fact. Spartan mothers would hand their sons a shield before battle and tell them to come back with it or on it. This meant either come back victorious, still holding your shield, or come back dead, carried on your shield. Coming back without your shield meant you dropped it to run away, and that was the biggest shame possible. So, congrats. You've survived your first few years in Sparta. You weren't left on a mountain to die. You didn't succumb to the harsh bathing practices. You learned to endure discomfort without crying. You managed to not annoy any adults enough for them to reconsider that whole mountain-leaving thing. But don't celebrate just yet. Remember, we're still just getting started. In Sparta, making it through infancy wasn't considered an accomplishment. It was the bare minimum. The real challenges haven't even begun. As you approach your 7th birthday, you might start noticing your parents acting strange. Maybe your mum hugs you a little longer, Maybe your dad actually cracks a smile when you show him how well you can throw a rock. They know what's coming, and deep down, so do you. Because in Sparta, turning 7 wasn't marked with a fun party and gifts. It was marked by the end of whatever childhood you had. On your 7th birthday, you wouldn't be blowing out candles on a cake. You'd be saying goodbye to your family. But we'll get to that lovely chapter of Spartan life later. For now, just remember, you somehow made it through the first 7 years of Spartan life. That's quite an achievement, considering your life was nearly ended when you were still wearing your newborn onesie. So sleep tight, my friends. At least you weren't born in ancient Sparta, where making it through the first week of life was already beating the odds. And the next time you think your parents were strict, just remember, at least they didn't have you inspected for defects and leave you on a mountain if you didn't pass the test. Now, if you've survived this far in our story, you're already doing better than many Spartan babies, but the true challenge is yet to come. In our next chapter, we'll dive into the infamous Agog, the Spartan education system that makes modern boot camp look like a luxury spa retreat. Until then, appreciate your soft bed and the fact that nobody bathed you in wine as an infant. Sweet dreams. So you managed to survive birth inspection and your first 7 years in Sparta. Congrats. Most modern parents would throw a party when their kid turns 7. You get a special Spartan celebration too. Being ripped away from your family and thrown into what might be history's most brutal boarding school. Welcome to the Agog, where childhood dreams go to die and warriors are born. Think your school was tough? At least your teachers didn't beat you for crying. Actually, let me rephrase that. At least your teachers didn't beat you until you stopped crying, and then beat you some more just to make sure the lesson stuck. Your 7th birthday marks the end of whatever childhood you had. One day, you're sleeping under your family's roof. The next, you're being marched off to join the other boys your age in the barracks. Hope you weren't too attached to your parents, because family time just got reduced to brief, occasional visits. Your new family, a bunch of other terrified 7-year-olds and some older boys who see you as their personal punching bag. The Agog wasn't divided into neat little grades like modern schools. Instead, you were grouped by age. The little boys from 7 to 12, the youths from 12 to 18, and the young men from 18 to 20. And each group had the delightful job of making life miserable for the group below them. It was basically a pyramid scheme of pain. Your new home is a barracks, not exactly a 5-star hotel. The beds are hard, if you're lucky enough to get one. More likely, you're sleeping on a mat made of reeds that you gathered yourself from the Eurotas River. And those reeds, you're not allowed to use a knife to cut them. You have to tear them with your bare hands. Because in Sparta, even making your own bed has to be a test of strength. The Agog wasn't big on academic subjects. No algebra or essay writing here. Your curriculum was simple. Pain, more pain, and occasionally some useful skills that would help you inflict pain on others. You did learn some reading and writing, just enough to understand military orders and maybe read some inspiring war poems. Math, just enough to count your enemies and divide the spoils of war. Science, please. The only chemistry Spartans cared about was how quickly blood dried on bronze. Instead of books, your school supplies were your fists and whatever you could steal. Speaking of stealing, in Sparta, theft wasn't just allowed for young boys, it was encouraged. But here's the catch. If you got caught, you weren't punished for stealing. You were punished for getting caught. The lesson wasn't don't steal, it was don't be bad at stealing. There's a famous story about a Spartan boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When he was questioned by a supervisor, he denied everything. Meanwhile, the fox was literally eating through his stomach. The boy stood there, face straight, not making a sound until he collapsed and died rather than admit his theft. In most places, this would be a tragedy. In Sparta, it was an inspirational tale they told to children. Sweet dreams, kids! Food in the Agog made modern school lunches look like gourmet meals. Your main dish was black broth, a lovely soup made of boiled pig's blood, salt and vinegar. Ancient writers from other Greek cities said it was so disgusting, they understood why Spartans were ready to die in battle. When you're eating pig's blood soup every day, charging into enemy spears starts looking like a viable alternative. The portions were deliberately small, just enough to keep you alive but constantly hungry. The idea was to teach you to deal with hunger and, of course, encourage you to steal more food. Remember, getting caught stealing meant a beating, so you either went hungry or got really good at theft. It's like a really twisted version of home economics class. Physical training was the main focus of your day. Running, wrestling, fighting with weapons, all done barefoot, wearing just a thin tunic summer or winter. In summer, you baked under the Greek sun. In winter, you froze. Complaining about either meant, you guessed it, more beatings. And speaking of beatings, let's talk about the annual festival of Artemis Orthia, where boys were whipped at an altar until they bled, sometimes to death. This wasn't punishment for anything specific. It was just a regular religious festival. The boy who endured the longest without crying or begging for mercy won honour. Not a trophy, not a day off, just honour. And adults would gather around to watch this, cheering as if it were a sporting event. Because nothing says healthy society like adults getting entertainment from watching children being whipped. Hygiene wasn't high on the Spartan priority list. You got one bath a year. The rest of the time, you washed in the cold waters of the Eurotas River. Soap? That's for weaklings. Deodorant? Not invented yet, and if it had been, Spartans would have banned it anyway. The smell of unwashed teenage boys was probably a weapon in itself. Your clothing consisted of one thin cloak, which had to last you an entire year. No extras, no changes of clothes. If it tore, you fixed it. If you outgrew it, too bad. In winter, the older boys would sometimes take pity on the younger ones and let them huddle close for warmth. This wasn't kindness. It was just making sure the next generation of warriors didn't freeze to death before they could be useful in battle. Privacy? That wasn't a word Spartans understood. You ate together, trained together, slept together, and suffered together. Every moment of your day was observed and judged by someone older and meaner than you. Your every weakness was noted and punished. Your achievements were acknowledged with a nod at best, because excellence wasn't praised, it was expected. One of the most important lessons you learned in the Agoge was to endure pain without showing it. Crying was for babies and Athenians, which to Spartans were basically the same thing. If you were injured during training or punished for some offence, you were expected to bear it silently, with your face showing no emotion. The only acceptable facial expression in Sparta was stoic determination, with occasional variations of murderous rage saved for battle. By the time you were 12, you'd learn to survive on minimal food, endure extreme temperatures, fight with your fists and basic weapons, steal without getting caught, and take a beating without crying. In modern terms, you'd have an impressive set of criminal skills and severe emotional trauma. In Spartan terms, you were just getting started. The teenage years in the Agog made the earlier years look like a gentle warm-up. Your training intensified. The older boys became even more creative in finding ways to test and torment you. The supervisors expected more and punished failure more harshly. Your body was constantly covered in bruises, cuts and scars. Each one a lesson, or so the Spartans claimed. Friendship existed in Sparta, but not the kind where you share secrets and braid each other's hair. Spartan friendship was forged in shared suffering and mutual protection. You learned to fight not just for yourself, but for your comrades. Because in battle, the guy next to you was the one keeping you alive. You didn't have to like him, but you had to be willing to die for him, and he for you. There's a reason Sparta produced the fiercest warriors in Greece. By the time a boy emerged from the Agogia aged 20, he had endured more pain, hunger and hardship than most people faced in a lifetime. He had been beaten, frozen, starved and humiliated, and had survived it all. He wasn't just trained to fight, he was trained to see death as preferable to defeat or dishonour. So there you have it, Spartan education in all its brutal glory. While kids in Athens were learning philosophy and art, Spartan kids were learning how to take a punch and sleep through winter with just a thin cloak. While other Greek children were playing with toys, Spartan children were playing games where the loser got beaten. Modern parents worry about their kids' screen time and whether they're eating enough vegetables. Spartan parents worried about whether their sons would survive another day of education and whether they were tough enough to someday stand in the shield wall against Sparta's enemies. The most amazing thing about the Agoj wasn't that it created fierce warriors, it's that any child survived it at all. And yet generation after generation of Spartan boys endured this system, growing up to become the soldiers that all of Greece feared. If you're thinking you could have made it through this brutal childhood, you're either fooling yourself or you're the toughest person alive. So the next time you think your school days were rough, remember the Agoj, where the homework was stealing food without getting caught, detention meant being whipped until you bled, and graduation only meant you now got to face actual battles, where enemies were actively trying to kill you. And if you thought the Agog was bad, wait until you see what adult life was like for a Spartan warrior. But that's a story for later. For now, just be thankful you weren't born in ancient Sparta, where your childhood ended at 7, and adulthood was something you were lucky to reach at all. So you've somehow survived the Agoj. Your body is covered in scars, your mind is hardwired for violence, and you've mastered the art of stealing food without getting caught. Congratulations, you've reached the ripe old age of 20 in Sparta. In most ancient societies, this would mean you're now a free adult, ready to start your own life. In Sparta, it means you get to graduate from practice warrior to actual warrior. The good news is you're finally a full citizen. The bad news is you're still not free. Welcome to adulthood, Spartan style, where you're essentially state property with a pulse. While young men in Athens were studying philosophy, debating in the assembly or learning a trade, you get to devote your entire existence to being a weapon. Not wielding a weapon, being one. At 20, you join the ranks of the homoioi, or equals, full Spartan citizens who form the backbone of the military. The term equals is a bit misleading though. Sure, all Spartan warriors are equal in their devotion to the state and their readiness to die in battle, but there's still a strict hierarchy, and you're starting at the bottom. Your first order of business as a fresh adult is to apply for membership in a syssitia, a mess group or dining club. And this isn't like picking which table to sit at in the cafeteria. Your application has to be unanimously approved by all current members. Just one no vote and you're rejected. And rejection doesn't mean you find another group. It means you lose your citizenship rights. No pressure. These syssitia are where you'll take all your meals for the rest of your life. Yes, you read that right. Even after becoming an adult, you still don't get to eat at home. The state wants to make sure you're bonding with your fellow soldiers 24/7. Nothing says team building like never escaping your co-workers, even at dinner time. Speaking of dinner, you're expected to contribute to the mess. Every member must donate a monthly quota of barley, wine, cheese, figs, and a little money to buy meat. Can't afford your share? Too bad. You're demoted from the citizenship ranks. The Spartans weren't big on social safety nets. The food itself hasn't improved much since your Agog days. Your main course is still that delicious black broth. Yes, the pig's blood soup that made other Greeks gag. At least now you get slightly larger portions. Just enough to maintain your fighting weight, but never enough to feel comfortable. Because comfort, as you've learned by now, is the enemy of excellence in Sparta. Now let's talk about your living arrangements. While men in other Greek cities lived with their wives and children, you get to keep bunking with the boys. Yes, even after marriage, Spartan men continue to live in the barracks until age 30. Your visits home to your wife were brief, secret, and infrequent. Nothing says honeymoon phase like sneaking out of the barracks at night and having to be back before anyone notices you're gone. Marriage itself was a strange affair in Sparta. Some sources say that bride and groom didn't even see each other before the wedding. On the wedding night, the bride's hair was cut short. She was dressed in men's clothes and left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak in, do the deed, and sneak back to the barracks before dawn. Romance Spartan style. The purpose of marriage wasn't love or companionship. It was making more Spartans. If you and your wife didn't produce children after a reasonable time, the state might reassign one or both of you to more fertile partners. Your body belongs to Sparta, and so do any children you produce. Speaking of which, if you thought your childhood was harsh, wait until you see how your kids are raised. You get to watch your sons go through the same brutal training you endured, and you're expected to approve. Show too much concern for your child's safety or comfort, and you're seen as weak and unpatriotic. Father of the Year in Sparta means being okay with your 7-year-old being beaten for educational purposes. Your daily life as a young Spartan warrior revolves around one thing: preparation for war. Your training continues, but now it's even more intense and specific. Hours upon hours of drilling with the spear and shield, marching in formation until your unit moves as one body, practicing the shield wall technique that made Spartan phalanxes nearly impenetrable. Physical fitness remains paramount. Daily exercises keep your body in peak fighting condition. Strength, speed, endurance, all constantly tested and improved. Skip a training session? Unthinkable. The punishment would be severe, but more importantly, the shame would be unbearable. In a society where your worth is measured by your military value, being physically fit isn't vanity, it's your civic duty. The famous red cloak and bronze shield are now yours to bear, but they're not just fashion statements or protective gear. They're symbols of what you are: a Spartan warrior, a living weapon dedicated to the state. The shield, in particular, carries special significance. As your mother probably told you before your first battle, come back with your shield or on it. Return victorious or return dead. There's no third option. Your actual shield is enormous, about 3 feet in diameter, made of wood with a bronze facing weighing around 16 pounds. It's designed to protect not just you, but part of the man to your left when you're in formation. Drop your shield to run away, and you leave your comrade exposed. This is why losing your shield is the ultimate disgrace. It proves you valued your life above your duty to your brothers in arms. Life isn't all brutal training, though. There are occasional festivals and religious ceremonies, but even these are military in nature. The dances you perform are war dances. The songs you sing are about famous battles or fallen heroes. Even your prayers to the gods focus mainly on asking for strength in battle and victory for Sparta. As a young warrior, you also get your first taste of real political power. All Spartan citizens can attend the assembly and vote on matters of state. But don't get too excited about this democracy. The assembly can only vote yes or no on proposals put forward by the kings and elders, and voting is done by shouting. The side that shouts loudest wins. It's less careful deliberation of complex issues, and more who can make the most noise. One especially charming political tradition is the annual declaration of war against the Helots, Sparta's slave population, who outnumber actual Spartans by about 10 to 1. Yes, every year Sparta formally declares war on its own slaves, making any killing of Helots not just legal but patriotic. As a young warrior, you might be selected for the Crypteia, a secret police force that terrorizes the Helot population, killing anyone who seems too strong or rebellious. It's essentially state-sanctioned murder, designed to keep the slaves in line through fear. The constant war footing isn't just about external enemies or keeping slaves in check. It's also because fighting is literally the only skill you have. Spartans were forbidden from learning trades, engaging in commerce, or practicing crafts. Money-making was considered beneath a citizen. Your job is war, period. This sounds impressive until you realise it means Sparta had no artists, no philosophers, no innovators, no architects. All the magnificent temples, sculptures, plays and philosophical works that we associate with ancient Greece, none of them came from Sparta. The society that prided itself on producing the perfect human specimens actually contributed almost nothing to human culture or knowledge. But you don't have time to ponder these philosophical questions about your society's lack of cultural achievements. You're too busy preparing for the next battle, the next war, the next test of your warrior skills. That's all that matters in Sparta, being ready when the call to arms comes, and it will come. Sparta was almost constantly at war with someone. Other Greek city-states, Persians, rebellious helots, you name it. Peace was just the annoying interval between opportunities for glory. As a young warrior, you're eager for your chance to prove yourself in real combat, not just training exercises. So there you have it. Life as a young Spartan warrior. You belong to the state, live with your comrades rather than your family, eat terrible food, train constantly, and wait for your chance to die gloriously in battle. Your personal desires, interests, and comfort mean nothing. Your value is measured solely by your usefulness as a weapon of Sparta. And the truly scary part, this is actually as good as it gets, because what awaits you next is the reality of ancient warfare, a horrific, bloody mess that has nothing in common with the sanitized versions you see in movies. But that's a story for later. For now, just remember that while other young men across the ancient world were falling in love, learning trades, creating art, or exploring ideas, you're spending the prime of your life marching in formation and eating pig's blood soup with the same group of guys you've been stuck with since you were 7. Living the dream Spartan style. So you've survived birth selection, the agauge, and the joys of young adulthood in Sparta. By now, you're probably thinking, hey, this isn't so bad. I'm tough, I'm trained, I'm ready for anything. Well, buckle up, warrior, because now comes the part where people actively try to kill you. Welcome to war Spartan style, where you finally get to put all that brutal training to use. The good news? You have a chance at eternal glory. The bad news? You have to survive dozens of brutal battles first, and the odds aren't exactly in your favour. Let's start with your pre-battle routine. While soldiers from other armies might spend their last peaceful moments praying, making sacrifices to the gods, or having existential crises about their mortality, Spartan warriors have a different approach. You carefully groom yourself. Yes, in Sparta, looking good is part of battle preparation. You oil your body and comb your long hair until it shines. This isn't vanity, it's tradition. Spartans believe that a warrior should look his best when facing death. It's basically the ancient equivalent of dressing up for your own funeral, except you're hoping it's just a dress rehearsal. Your battle equipment hasn't changed much over the centuries. You wear a red tunic, not because it looks intimidating, though it does, but because it hides bloodstains. Practical fashion Spartan style. Your armour consists of a bronze breastplate or cuirass, bronze greaves to protect your shins, and a bronze helmet that covers most of your face, leaving just enough visibility to see who you're about to stab. Your primary weapon is the dory, a spear about 7 to 9 feet long, with a leaf-shaped iron spearhead at one end and a bronze butt spike at the other. This spike isn't just decorative. If your spear breaks, you can flip it and keep fighting. The Spartans were nothing if not efficient with their killing tools. Your most important piece of equipment, though, is your shield, the aspis, sometimes called a hoplon. It's large, round and heavy, covering you from chin to knee. The shield isn't just for your protection, it's for the protection of the entire phalanx. When you stand in formation, your shield covers half of your body and half of the man to your left. This is why dropping your shield is the ultimate disgrace in Sparta. You're not just endangering yourself, you're endangering your brothers in arms. Before battle, you and your comrades eat a hearty meal. If you can call black broth hearty, this disgusting pig's blood soup is your power meal before combat. The thinking was that it's better to fight on a full stomach, even if that stomach is filled with something that would make most people vomit. Other Greeks claimed Spartans ate this revolting brew to prepare themselves for death. When your daily meals are this bad, charging into enemy spears starts looking appealing. As you march to battle, you're not quiet and solemn like other armies. Sparta doesn't do solemn marches. Instead, pipers play music, and the entire army moves in perfect step. This isn't just for show. Moving in rhythm helps maintain formation and intimidates the enemy. There's something deeply unnerving about seeing thousands of men moving as one, like a single organism with spears. Spartan battle tactics aren't particularly complex or varied. You don't need fancy manoeuvres when you have the most disciplined infantry in the ancient world. Your basic tactic is the phalanx, a tightly packed formation of overlapping shields with spears pointing forward. It's essentially a human tank, a moving wall of bronze and iron designed to crush anything in its path. When the battle begins, you don't rush forward screaming like warriors in movies. Spartans advance in silence, in perfect order, at a steady pace. While other Greeks might charge with wild battle cries, you and your comrades march calmly toward the enemy, red cloaks flowing, spears levelled, shields locked. The psychological effect on your opponents is devastating. Many enemies break formation and run before the first blow is struck. Now let's be clear about something. Ancient battle was nothing like what you see in movies. There were no elegant duels, no spinning moves, no jumping attacks. It was a brutal pushing match with sharp objects. Two phalanxes would crash into each other like massive football scrimmages, except everyone has spears and swords instead of footballs. The front line, where you're stationed as an experienced warrior, stabs with spears while pushing forward with shields. The noise is deafening. Thousands of men shouting, metal clanging against metal, the screams of the wounded and dying. The smell is even worse. Blood, sweat, urine and feces as fear makes men lose control of their bodily functions. If your spear breaks, you draw your zephos, a short sword designed for stabbing in close quarters. This is where the real horror begins. In the crush of bodies, you can barely move your arms. You stab upward, under the enemy's shield if possible, aiming for the throat, armpit or groin, any unprotected area. It's not glorious. It's not heroic. It's brutal, desperate and terrifying. But you don't show fear. You were trained from age 7 for this moment. While other men might panic, flee or freeze, you remain steady. This is the true value of Spartan training. Not superior fighting techniques, but superior mental discipline under extreme stress. The battle might last hours, with the front lines periodically rotating to give exhausted fighters a brief rest. There's no time out, no half-time show. The fighting continues until one side breaks and runs. And here's where being a Spartan gets especially dangerous. You're expected to pursue and kill fleeing enemies. While other Greek armies might be content with winning the field, Spartans are taught to annihilate their opponents completely. If you're wounded, don't expect a medical evacuation or field hospital with anaesthesia. Field medicine in ancient Greece consisted primarily of try not to die. If you can still walk, you keep fighting. If you can't, you lie where you fell until the battle ends. If your side wins, your comrades might carry you back to camp where a field surgeon will do his best with wine for disinfectant and a sharp knife for surgical tools. If your side loses, well, hope the enemy believes in giving honourable burials. The worst wounds aren't always the fatal ones. A spear through the gut might kill you quickly, but a damaged limb that becomes infected could mean days or weeks of agony before death. And if you survive with a significant disability, you're no longer useful as a warrior, which means you're no longer a valuable citizen. There are no veterans' benefits in Sparta, no honourable retirement for the wounded. Your choices are to find some way to still be useful to the state, or live with the shame of being seen as a burden. Between major battles, you're not sitting around playing ancient Greek board games. Sparta maintains its fighting edge through constant smaller conflicts, border skirmishes, and putting down helot rebellions. There's always another fight, another chance to prove your worth or meet your end. And let's not forget the psychological toll. Modern soldiers develop PTSD after a single deployment. You're fighting continuously for decades, seeing friends die horrible deaths, killing men face to face, experiencing the full sensory nightmare of ancient combat over and over again. Sparta has no therapists, no concept of trauma or psychological wounds. Your options for dealing with the horror are simple: endure it or die. The most famous Spartan battle, of course, is Thermopylae, the stand of the 300 against the Persian army. But here's what popular culture gets wrong. Those 300 Spartans knew they were going to die. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to buy time for the rest of Greece to prepare. King Leonidas chose men who already had sons, ensuring their family lines would continue. It wasn't just a suicide mission. It was a calculated sacrifice. If you somehow survive decades of this, battle after battle, wound after wound, you reach an age where your body simply can't perform at the level required for frontline combat. This doesn't mean retirement to a peaceful life of storytelling by the fire. It means you get assigned to train younger warriors, lead from the rear, or serve on councils. There's no out from service to Sparta until you physically cannot serve anymore. Death in battle, by the way, is considered the ultimate achievement in Spartan culture. Die fighting for Sparta, and you get something almost no other Spartan gets: your name on your tombstone. Most Spartans were buried in unmarked graves. Only women who died in childbirth and men who died in battle were deemed worthy of name memorials. Everyone else was simply forgotten. That's why the famous Spartan mother's farewell, "Come back with your shielder on it," isn't just tough talk. It's a cultural value so deeply ingrained that mothers genuinely preferred their sons dead than dishonoured. When you're raised in a society where your own mother would rather see you carried home as a corpse than see you survive as a coward, running away isn't even considered an option. So there you have it. War, Spartan style. No glory, no heroic speeches, no dramatic duels. Just brutal, bloody combat where survival often feels like a temporary condition. You fight, you bleed, your comrades die, and you do it all again next season like some macabre sporting schedule. The truly incredible thing is that men endured this for their entire adult lives. From their first battle as young warriors until they were too old to lift a shield, Spartan men knew nothing but war and preparation for war. They lived with constant pain from old wounds, nightmares from battles past, and the certainty that their next engagement could be their last. So the next time you see a movie portraying ancient battle as exciting and glorious, remember the reality, the terror, the stench, the screams, the sight of your childhood friends disemboweled before your eyes. Remember that for all their fearsome reputation, Spartans were still human beings thrust into inhuman circumstances, trained from childhood to endure what no person should have to experience. And if, by some miracle, you survive to old age in Sparta, well, that's a whole different challenge. Because in a society that values nothing but military prowess, what happens when your fighting days are behind you? But that's a story for later. For now, clean your shield, sharpen your spear, and prepare for another day of war, the only life a Spartan knows. Against all odds, you've survived. You made it through the brutal inspection as a newborn, endured the Agog's daily tortures, served decades as a warrior, fought in countless battles, and somehow avoided death by enemy weapons, disease, or training accidents. Congratulations, you're now an old Spartan warrior, a rare breed indeed. While reaching old age in any ancient society was an achievement, in Sparta it was practically a miracle. Most of your childhood companions are long dead, left on mountainsides as infants, beaten to death in training or killed in battle. You're one of the few who live to see your hair turn grey. But don't expect a comfortable retirement with a pension and a beach house. This is Sparta, where even old age comes with responsibilities, pain, and yes, more black broth soup. Let's start with the good news. If you've reached the age of 60, you're eligible for election to the Gerousia, the council of elders that serves as Sparta's Senate. This body of 28 elders plus the 2 kings holds tremendous power in Spartan society. They propose laws to the assembly, serve as the Supreme Court in criminal cases, and can even overrule the kings in some matters. After a lifetime of taking orders and following the commands of others, you finally get to be part of the group that makes the rules. Election to the Gerousia is for life, which sounds impressive until you remember that life for a 60-year-old man in ancient Greece likely meant another 5 to 10 years at most. And the competition is fierce. Only the most respected warriors with the most impressive records get chosen. If you made it to old age but were just average in battle, you're not getting that seat at the table. Even if you don't make it to the Gerousia, being an older Spartan citizen still grants you certain privileges. You're finally excused from military service, though you might be called upon to train young warriors or serve in advisory roles during conflicts. You no longer have to live in the barracks, which means you can actually live with your wife full-time, assuming she hasn't forgotten what you look like after decades of brief nighttime visits. But old age in Sparta isn't some peaceful golden period. Your body, which has endured extreme physical stress since childhood, is now falling apart in spectacular fashion. Those childhood beatings, they've left permanent scars and joint damage. That spear wound from the Battle of Mantinea 30 years ago, it aches constantly and never healed properly. The broken bones, dislocated shoulders and concussions from decades of training, they've all come back to haunt you in the form of chronic pain and limited mobility. Modern athletes who train intensively for a decade often suffer lifelong physical consequences. You've been training and fighting at maximum intensity for over 50 years. Your spine is compressed, your joints are worn down to bone on bone, and simple movements that you once performed effortlessly now cause shooting pain. There are no pain medications beyond wine, no physical therapy beyond walk it off, and no disability accommodations beyond try not to look weak in public. Your diet hasn't improved much either. You're still expected to attend your Syssitia, the dining mess that you've eaten at since you were 20. The food is still terrible, the benches are still hard, and now your aging digestive system has even more trouble handling that infamous black broth. But showing up remains mandatory if you want to maintain your citizen status. Miss too many meals, and even in your old age you could face demotion from the ranks of the equals. Dementia or other cognitive decline would be especially devastating in a culture that prizes mental sharpness and decision-making ability. A Spartan elder showing signs of mental confusion might quickly lose his position of respect and authority. There's no concept of elder care or assisted living. If you can't function independently, you become a burden on your family or the state. The very thing you've been trained your entire life to avoid being. Death, when it finally comes, might be seen as a relief from the physical suffering of old age. But even in death, Spartan austerity rules. Unless you died in battle during your warrior years, your grave will be simple and unadorned. No elaborate tombstones, no lengthy epitaphs listing your achievements. Just a plain marker with your name, if you're lucky. Spartans believed excessive displays, even in death, promoted vanity and individualism, qualities they despised. The true tragedy of reaching old age in Sparta isn't just the physical pain or the simple burial. It's seeing the results of the system you devoted your life to. By the late 5th century BCE, Sparta was already in decline. Their obsessive focus on military training at the expense of everything else left them unable to adapt to changing warfare tactics. Their refusal to allow immigration or to naturalize foreigners meant their citizen population steadily declined. Their harsh treatment of helots led to constant rebellions that drained resources and manpower. As an old Spartan, you might live long enough to see your society's flaws exposed. You might witness the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where Thebes shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. You might see the number of full Spartan citizens dwindle from thousands to mere hundreds, as fewer and fewer men survived the increasingly harsh standards. You might realise that the system you suffered for, killed for, and sacrificed everything for was fundamentally unsustainable. But would you say anything about it? Probably not. By the time you reach old age in Sparta, you've spent 6 decades having independent thought beaten, starved, and trained out of you. You've been taught that the Spartan way is the only way, that questioning tradition is weakness, that change is decay. Even as you watch your society crumble around you, you're more likely to blame insufficient adherence to tradition than the traditions themselves. So there you have it. Old age in Sparta. Your body's broken, your mind is indoctrinated, your family relationships are strained, and your society is rigidly following a path to its own destruction. Your reward for surviving the Spartan system is getting to enforce that system on others, perpetuating the cycle of brutality that shaped you. The final irony? Despite their legendary toughness and military prowess, the Spartans left almost nothing of lasting value to civilization. No great buildings like the Parthenon, no revolutionary philosophical ideas like those from Athens, no scientific discoveries, no literary masterpieces, just stories of their brutality, their discipline, and their eventual decline. You dreamed of glory, fame, and immortality. You got starvation, bruises, and a lifetime of blood, sweat, and black broth. Welcome to life as a Spartan. From your first breath as a newborn being inspected for defects, to your last breath as an elder watching your society fade, survival was never about thriving. It was just about enduring one more day in the most feared and feared society of the ancient world. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Sparta isn't that they created such fearsome warriors, it's that anyone would choose to live that way at all. But then again, in Sparta, choice was never really part of the equation. You lived as Sparta demanded, or you didn't live at all. Tonight on Digging into History, we journey through inventions that forever changed our world. From Edison's light bulb illuminating the darkness, to the Wright brothers conquering the skies, from the birth of the internet connecting billions, to Ford's assembly line transforming production, and finally to the personal computer revolutionizing our daily lives. Each invention didn't just solve a problem, it fundamentally reshaped human civilization. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to travel through time as we explore how these revolutionary technologies created the modern world we live in today. In the dimming light of a late autumn afternoon in 1879, a small workshop in Menlo Park, New Jersey, glowed with a light that would soon change the world. Inside, Thomas Edison and his team of dedicated researchers watched with exhausted but triumphant eyes as a small glass bulb continued to emit a steady warm glow. For over 13 hours, this delicate creation had been burning, defying the short-lived attempts that had come before it. This was not the first electric light ever created, but it marked the moment when electric lighting became practical, affordable, and ready to transform human civilization. The light that burned in that workshop would soon spread across the globe, forever altering the rhythm of human life. The story of electric light began long before Edison's breakthrough. Humans had been seeking ways to push back the darkness since the earliest days of civilization. For thousands of years, fire was our only tool against the night, first as simple campfires, then as oil lamps, candles and gas lights. Each improvement brought better illumination, but all shared the same drawbacks. They produced smoke, created fire hazards, consumed oxygen, and provided uneven flickering light. The dream of a clean, safe, steady source of artificial light tantalized inventors and scientists throughout the early 19th century. By the 1870s, the race to create practical electric lighting was heating up. Scientists and inventors around the world understood the basic principle, that electricity flowing through a resistant material would cause it to heat up and glow. The challenge was finding a material that would glow brightly without quickly burning up or melting. Many brilliant minds had tried and failed to solve this puzzle. British inventor Joseph Swan had made significant progress with carbon filaments. In Russia, Alexander Lodygin had experimented with carbon rods in vacuum tubes. In Canada, Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans had patented an electric lamp. The pieces of the solution were scattered across continents, waiting for someone to bring them together. Enter Thomas Edison, already famous for his phonograph and improvements to the telegraph. Edison was not merely an inventor, but a master of the innovation process itself. While others worked alone or in small groups, Edison created what many consider the first modern research and development laboratory. His facility at Menlo Park brought together dozens of skilled workers, craftsmen, engineers, mathematicians and scientists, all focused on solving problems through methodical experimentation. Edison understood that invention was not just about brilliant ideas, but about the patient, persistent work of testing, refining, and improving. Edison and his team began their light bulb work in earnest in 1878, after Edison had visited William Wallace's lighting system demonstration in Connecticut. Edison was convinced he could improve upon existing designs to create a practical, economical electric light that could replace gas lighting in homes and businesses. With his typical confidence, he announced to the press that he would solve the electric light problem, a declaration that attracted both investors and skeptics. The team at Menlo Park faced a daunting challenge. They needed to create a bulb with a filament that would glow brightly for hundreds of hours without breaking down, all while keeping electricity consumption economical. This wasn't just about the bulb itself. Edison understood that he needed to create an entire system of electrical generation and distribution to make his invention practical. Edison's team tested thousands of materials for filaments, different metals, carbonized threads, plant fibers, and more. Each material was shaped into thin filaments, placed in glass bulbs from which the air was removed to create a vacuum, and then tested to see how long it would glow before burning out. Early attempts lasted only minutes or hours. The workshop filled with the acrid smell of burned materials and the disappointed sighs of tired researchers as filament after filament failed. The breakthrough began to take shape when they turned to carbonized materials. By October 1879, they had created a bulb with a carbonized cotton thread that burned for over 13 hours. Within months, they improved this to a carbonized bamboo filament that could last over 1,200 hours. This was the practical electric light bulb the world had been waiting for, long-lasting enough to be commercially viable. But Edison knew that a single bulb was not enough. For electric lighting to replace gas lighting, he needed to create an entire system. While perfecting the bulb, Edison and his team were simultaneously developing everything needed for a complete electrical distribution network: generators, wiring systems, electrical meters, safety fuses, on-off switches, and more. By 1882, Edison had opened the Pearl Street Station in New York City, America's first central power plant, initially serving 59 customers in Lower Manhattan with 800 light bulbs. The impact of practical electric lighting spread rapidly across the world's cities. By the late 1880s, electric streetlights began replacing gas lamps in major city centres. The warm glow of electric bulbs began to appear in upscale homes, theatres, department stores, and factories. For the first time in human history, interior spaces could be brightly and safely illuminated without fire. This transformation went far beyond simple convenience. Electric lighting fundamentally changed human relationships with day and night. Throughout history, most people's activities had been governed by the rising and setting of the sun. Work largely stopped when darkness fell, except for essential tasks performed by candlelight or gas lamp. With electric lighting, factories could operate around the clock with multiple shifts of workers. Stores could stay open into the evening. People could read, write, and socialize long after sunset. The social impact was profound. Streets became safer at night as electric streetlights pushed back shadows where criminals once hid. Nightlife flourished as restaurants, theatres, and entertainment venues took advantage of reliable lighting. Education expanded as people gained more hours to read and study. The productivity of industries soared as work could continue regardless of the season or time of day. In homes, electric light brought dramatic changes to daily life. Families could gather in the evening in well-lit rooms rather than clustering around a single lamp or candle. Reading became easier and more widespread, boosting literacy. Homes became cleaner as the soot and smoke from gas lamps and candles disappeared. Fire risk decreased significantly, saving countless lives and properties that might otherwise have been lost to flames. For women, whose domestic work had often extended into the dimly lit evening hours, electric light brought relief from eye strain and the ability to complete tasks more quickly and safely. Children could study in the evening without damaging their vision. The elderly, whose aging eyes struggled with dim lighting, gained new independence. The spread of electric lighting was not instantaneous or universal. Initially, electric light was a luxury for the wealthy and for businesses that could justify the expense through increased productivity. Rural areas lagged far behind cities in electrification. In the United States, while major cities had widespread electric service by 1900, many rural communities would wait until the 1930s and the Rural Electrification Act before receiving power. This uneven distribution created new social divides between the electrified and the non-electrified. Access to electric lighting became a symbol of progress and modernity, while those still using candles or oil lamps were increasingly seen as living in the past. Governments and utilities faced growing pressure to expand electrical networks to serve more communities. Meanwhile, the technology of electric lighting continued to evolve. Edison's carbon filament bulbs gave way to more efficient designs. In 1904, European inventors introduced tungsten filament bulbs that burned brighter and lasted longer. In the 1920s, bulbs began to be filled with inert gases rather than vacuums, further improving performance. Fluorescent lighting, developed in the 1930s, offered greater efficiency for commercial spaces. Each improvement made electric lighting more affordable and accessible to more people. The industry that grew around electric lighting created millions of jobs worldwide, from the miners who extracted copper for wiring and power plant workers, to electricians who installed home systems and factory workers who manufactured bulbs, lamps, and fixtures. Electricity became one of the foundations of modern economic growth. Electric lighting also sparked broader electrical revolutions. Once homes and businesses were wired for lighting, they quickly began adding other electrical devices. The same wires that powered light bulbs could power fans, heaters, kitchen appliances, and eventually radios, televisions, and computers. Electric lighting was the pioneering technology that opened the door to complete electrification of daily life. Public health improved dramatically with electric lighting. Hospitals could perform surgeries at any hour with perfect illumination. Food production became safer as processing facilities replaced dim, smoky environments with clean, bright workspaces. Water purification plants used electricity to treat drinking water. Even home hygiene improved as people could better see dust, dirt, and pests that might have lurked in shadowy corners. The environmental impact was complex. While electric lights eliminated the local pollution of gas lamps and candles, the power plants that generated electricity created new forms of pollution, particularly as coal became the dominant fuel for electricity generation. This trade-off, cleaner local environments versus centralized pollution sources, would become a pattern repeated throughout the electrical age. The cultural impact of electric lighting found expression in art, literature, and entertainment. Painters explored the new qualities of artificial light. Nighttime entertainment flourished. Photography advanced as electric lighting allowed for indoor picture taking without the dangerous flash powders previously used. Cinema became possible as electric lights provided both illumination for filming and power for projectors. New forms of advertising emerged as electric signs and billboards captured attention after dark. Perhaps most profoundly, electric lighting changed human perceptions of darkness itself. Throughout history, night had been a time of mystery, danger, and supernatural fear. Cultural traditions around the world included countless stories of night creatures, spirits, and perils that lurked in darkness. As electric lights pushed back the shadows, some of this mystique faded. Night became less a separate realm and more simply a darker version of day, a space that could be controlled, navigated, and utilized. Sleep patterns changed as people stayed awake longer. Before electric lighting, Most people slept in patterns closely aligned with sunset and sunrise, often including a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. With artificial lighting, the single 8-hour sleep pattern became the norm, and staying up late became common. This shift aligned with industrial work schedules but created new forms of sleep deprivation and disruption unknown to previous generations. Edison himself could not have foreseen all these consequences when he and his team watched their successful bulb glow in 1879. What began as a quest to create a better light source spiraled outward to touch virtually every aspect of human society. The light bulb became more than an invention. It became a universal symbol of innovation itself. Even today, a glowing light bulb represents the moment of inspiration, the birth of a new idea. By the early 20th century, electric lights had transformed the visual appearance of the human world. City skylines glowed at night. Theaters were outlined in thousands of bulbs. Department store windows shone with displays visible day and night. Homes glowed warmly through windows that once would have been dark. From space, the spread of electric lighting would eventually become visible as webs of light tracing human habitation across the dark side of the planet. Communication networks expanded alongside electric lighting. Telegraph and telephone systems, which often shared poles with electrical lines, connected illuminated spaces across vast distances. News traveled faster. Business could be conducted across time zones. A globally connected world began to emerge, with electricity as its foundation. As the electrical grid expanded to power lighting, it created the infrastructure for the next waves of technological revolution. The same power lines that fed electric bulbs would eventually connect computers, enable the internet, and power the digital age. In this way, Edison's practical light bulb set the stage for innovations he could never have imagined. Yet for all its world-changing impact, the light bulb began with a simple human need: to extend the day beyond sunset, to push back darkness, to see more clearly. The same drive that had led our ancestors to capture fire now led to capturing electricity, transforming it from a frightening natural phenomenon into a controlled tool for human progress. As electric lighting spread across continents in the early 20th century, another technological revolution was taking shape, one that would further shrink distances and transform human mobility. While electric bulbs were changing how we experience night and day, a different invention was about to change our relationship with the Earth itself, freeing humans from the surface for the first time in our history and launching us into the age of flight. The world that Edison's light bulbs illuminated was about to become more connected than ever before, as a pair of bicycle mechanics from Ohio prepared to leave the ground behind and soar into the open sky. On a cold December morning in 1903, the wind swept across the sandy dunes of Kill Devil Hills near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the breeze steady at around 20 miles per hour. Two brothers from Ohio stood beside a strange contraption made of wood, cloth, and wire. They had come to this remote spot for its reliable winds and soft landing surfaces of sand. For years they had been pursuing what many considered an impossible dream: controlled, powered flight in a machine heavier than air. That morning, as local lifesavers and a curious onlooker watched, Orville Wright lay down on the lower wing of their flying machine, while his brother Wilbur stood nearby. At 10:35 a.m., after the engine was started and warmed up, the fragile craft began moving along a wooden rail. And then, for 12 magical seconds, it lifted from the earth. Humanity had entered the age of flight. The Wright brothers' achievement that day was both humble and monumental. Their first flight covered just 120 feet, less than the wingspan of a modern passenger jet. The aircraft stayed aloft for only 12 seconds. Yet this brief journey represented the crossing of a threshold that humans had dreamed about for thousands of years. Since ancient times, people had watched birds with envy and wonder, creating myths about flight and designing countless failed machines in attempts to join them in the sky. Now at last, humans had found a way to break free from the earth. The path to this moment had been long and filled with both triumph and tragedy. Throughout history, dreamers and inventors had been captivated by the possibility of flight. Ancient Chinese had flown kites, understanding principles of aerodynamics without achieving human flight. Leonardo da Vinci had sketched detailed designs for flying machines in the 15th century, including versions of helicopters and gliders, but lacked engines powerful and light enough to make them work. In the late 18th century, the Montgolfier brothers had achieved the first human flight in hot air balloons, allowing people to rise vertically, but with little control over horizontal movement. In the 19th century, experimenters began making real progress toward powered flight. Sir George Cayley in England identified the four forces of flight: weight, lift, drag, and thrust, and designed gliders that successfully carried people short distances. Otto Lilienthal in Germany made over 2,000 glider flights, gathering crucial data about wing surfaces and control before dying in a glider crash in 1896. Samuel Langley, head of the Smithsonian Institution, built large models that flew successfully but failed spectacularly when he attempted full-scale piloted flights just days before the Wright brothers succeeded. What set the Wright brothers apart was their methodical approach to solving the three essential problems of flight: lift to get the machine off the ground, propulsion to move it forward, and control to steer it. While others focused primarily on powerful engines or wing designs, the Wrights recognized that control was the most fundamental challenge. A flying machine without control would be useless and dangerous. They were also uniquely positioned by their background. They were bicycle manufacturers who understood mechanics, balance, and the importance of light, strong structures. Wilbur and Orville Wright grew up in a household that encouraged curiosity and practical problem-solving. Their father, a bishop in the Church of the United Brethren in Christ, kept a library full of books on diverse subjects. Their mother, who had attended college, unusual for women of her era, was mechanically skilled and created toys and household devices. Neither brother finished high school, but both were avid readers and natural engineers. In 1892, they opened a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, designing and building their own models. The skills they developed working with bicycles, creating light, strong frames, and understanding balance and control would prove invaluable in their flying experiments. Their interest in flight was sparked in 1896 when they read about Lilienthal's death in a glider crash. Rather than deterring them, this tragedy inspired their interest. They began by studying everything written about flight, requesting publications from the Smithsonian and other sources. They observed birds, noting how they maintained balance by twisting their wings. This led to their crucial innovation, wing warping, a system for controlling roll by twisting the wings that was the precursor to modern ailerons. Unlike many of their competitors, the Wrights built their knowledge step by step. They began with kites, then moved to gliders, testing their control systems before attempting powered flight. Between 1900 and 1902, they made multiple trips to Kitty Hawk, chosen for its steady winds and soft sand beaches, conducting hundreds of glider flights. They built their own wind tunnel to test wing shapes, gathering data that corrected errors in the existing aeronautical tables and allowed them to design more efficient wings. By 1903, they were ready to attempt powered flight. They had developed their own light aluminum engine with the help of their bicycle shop mechanic, Charlie Taylor. They designed and built their own propellers, understanding them as rotating wings rather than air screws, a conceptual breakthrough that made their propellers remarkably efficient. Their flying machine, the Wright Flyer, cost less than $1,000 to build, a tiny fraction of the government funding given to Samuel Langley for his failed attempts. After their first successful flight on December 17, 1903, they made 3 more flights that day, the last covering 852 feet, and staying airborne for 59 seconds. Then a gust of wind caught the Flyer, rolling it over and damaging it severely. They packed up the broken machine and returned to Dayton, where they began working on improved versions. Few newspapers reported their achievement. The world was not yet ready to believe that 2 bicycle mechanics had solved the problem of flight. Over the next 2 years, the Wrights continued improving their designs, moving their testing to a cow pasture near Dayton called Huffman Prairie. By late 1905, they had built the Flyer 3, capable of staying in the air for over 30 minutes and flying figures of 8. This was a fully practical aircraft, but the brothers were concerned about protecting their patents before demonstrating it publicly. They stopped flying and focused on securing business deals and patent protection. This pause gave others a chance to catch up. In France, Brazil, and elsewhere, aviators inspired by rumors of the Wrights' success began making their own attempts. Alberto Santos Dumont made the first public European flight in 1906. When the Wrights finally began public demonstrations in 1908, Wilbur in Europe and Orville in the United States, they stunned observers with their complete mastery of their machine. While other early aircraft could barely manage straight-line flights, the Wrights' plane could turn, bank, and make figure eights with precision. The world suddenly woke up to the reality of flight. Newspapers that had ignored or doubted the Wrights' earlier claims now filled their pages with breathless coverage. Aviation meets and competitions began drawing huge crowds. Wealthy enthusiasts and governments began ordering aircraft. In just a few years, flying went from impossible to inevitable in the public imagination. World War I, beginning in 1914, accelerated aviation development dramatically. What had been largely a sport and spectacle suddenly became a military necessity. Aircraft evolved from fragile constructions of wood, wire, and fabric to more robust machines capable of reconnaissance, fighting, and bombing. By the war's end in 1918, planes could fly over 130 miles per hour and reach altitudes above 20,000 feet. The vision of flight that had begun with 12 seconds over the sands of Kitty Hawk had transformed into something faster, higher, and more powerful than the Wrights could have imagined. The 1920s saw the beginning of commercial aviation. The first airlines offered passenger service, though flying remained an expensive luxury for the wealthy and adventurous. Airmail services were established, showing that aircraft had practical economic uses beyond military applications. Aviation pioneers like Charles Lindbergh captured the public imagination, turning pilots into celebrities and heroes. When Lindbergh completed the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic in 1927, he was greeted by the largest ticker-tape parade in New York City's history. The emotional impact of flight was profound. For all of human history, distance had been a fundamental constraint on human experience. Crossing an ocean meant weeks on a ship. Visiting distant lands required months or years of travel. Suddenly, these vast distances were shrinking. The world felt smaller, more accessible. People who had never expected to see beyond their own regions could now dream of visiting far-off places. Letters and goods that once took months to deliver could reach their destinations in days. For the ordinary person, early flight remained something experienced vicariously through news reports, movies, and the occasional glimpse of an aircraft overhead. But even this distant relationship with aviation changed how people thought about the world and their place in it. The sky was no longer just a canopy over the earth. It had become a medium of travel, a new frontier to explore. Children who once dreamed of becoming sailors or train engineers now looked up and imagined themselves as pilots. By the 1930s, aircraft design was advancing rapidly. All metal construction replaced wood and fabric. Enclosed cockpits replaced open ones. Radio communication and navigation instruments made flying safer and more reliable in different weather conditions. The Douglas DC-3, introduced in 1936, set new standards for commercial air travel with its comfort, reliability, and economy. For the first time, airlines could make profits just from carrying passengers, without relying on airmail subsidies. World War II brought another surge in aviation technology. Jet engines, developed independently in Britain and Germany, pushed aircraft speeds toward the sound barrier. Radar allowed tracking of aircraft and all-weather flying. Pressurized cabins permitted flight at much higher altitudes, above most weather disturbances. Strategic bombing changed warfare and demonstrated the global reach of air power. When the war ended in 1945, the foundation was laid for the modern age of jet travel. The post-war decade saw commercial aviation transform from luxury to mass transportation. The introduction of jet airliners like the de Havilland Comet and Boeing 707 in the 1950s cut travel times in half and made transoceanic flights routine. Ticket prices gradually fell as more people flew and airlines gained efficiency. By the 1970s, the Boeing 747, the first wide-body jumbo jet, was carrying hundreds of passengers on a single flight, further reducing costs. This democratization of flight had profound social implications. Tourism expanded dramatically as middle-class families could now afford to visit distant places. Business became more international as executives could travel between continents for meetings. Families spread across countries or continents could reunite more often. Fresh foods could be transported globally, changing diets and cuisine. Ideas, culture, and fashion spread more rapidly as people moved more freely around the world. Migration patterns shifted as air travel made movement between countries easier. People could maintain connections with their homelands while building lives in new places. Diaspora communities stayed more connected. International students could study abroad without committing to years away from home. A more globally mobile population emerged, with people increasingly identifying as citizens of the world, rather than just of their birth nation. The environmental footprint of aviation grew along with its popularity. Aircraft engines became more efficient, but the sheer volume of flights led to concerns about noise pollution near airports, air quality impacts, and eventually the contribution of aviation to climate change. The industry that had begun with a simple machine built by two brothers in a bicycle shop had grown into a global network with complex environmental, economic, and social effects. Air cargo transformed global trade and manufacturing. Companies could now source components from around the world, knowing they could be delivered quickly by air when needed. Just-in-time manufacturing became possible. High-value, perishable, or urgently needed items could move between continents overnight. The global economy became more integrated and interdependent through these aerial connections. Meanwhile, aviation continued pushing boundaries in speed, distance, and altitude. Military aircraft broke the sound barrier. Supersonic passenger travel became briefly available with the Concorde. Helicopters evolved from experimental oddities to vital tools for rescue, medical transport, construction, and reaching remote locations. Aircraft design became more specialized, with different types optimized for specific roles rather than attempting to serve all purposes. Spaceflight emerged as the next frontier, building directly on aviation technology. Many early astronauts began as test pilots. Rocket engines evolved from jet propulsion principles. The organizations that had developed aircraft now turned their expertise toward vehicles that could leave the atmosphere entirely. The dream of flight had expanded beyond the sky to the stars. For pilots, flight offered a unique perspective on the world. From above, human divisions like borders and property lines faded. The natural geography of mountains, rivers, and coastlines became more apparent. Many pilots described a profound sense of humility and connection when viewing Earth from above, seeing both its beauty and its fragility. This perspective would later influence environmental awareness, as photographs of Earth from space showed the planet as a single interconnected system. Aviation created new forms of community. Pilots shared a bond regardless of nationality. Airport workers, flight attendants, and others in the industry developed their own cultures and traditions. Plane spotters and aviation enthusiasts formed clubs and networks to share their passion. A global infrastructure of airports, air traffic control systems, and support services emerged, employing millions of people worldwide. Flight changed how people experienced time and distance. A journey that once would have been measured in weeks became hours. Places that had been effectively unreachable for most people became accessible destinations. The pace of life accelerated as business, communication, and travel all moved faster. Humans had to adapt psychologically to this new relationship with space and time. A world where breakfast could be in one continent and dinner in another. For all its technological sophistication, flight still retained elements of its magical beginnings. The moment of takeoff, when a massive metal machine breaks free from Earth's gravity, continued to inspire awe even in frequent flyers. The view from above, clouds, landscapes, sunrise and sunset from 30,000 feet, offered experiences impossible to replicate on the ground. Flight remained a reminder of human ingenuity and the fulfillment of an ancient dream. By the early 21st century, air travel had become so commonplace that it was easy to forget how recent and revolutionary it truly was. Less than a century separated the Wright brothers' 12-second flight from a world where nearly 40 million flights carried over 4 billion passengers annually. What had once been impossible had become unremarkable. Children born into this world could not imagine a time when humans were bound to the surface of the Earth. Yet even as flight became routine, new aviation frontiers emerged. Unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, created possibilities for delivery services, photography, monitoring, and unfortunately, new forms of warfare. Electric aircraft offered the potential for cleaner, quieter flight. Urban air mobility concepts proposed transforming transportation within cities. Space tourism beckoned the wealthy towards suborbital experiences. The story that began at Kitty Hawk continued evolving. Throughout its development, aviation demonstrated how a single technology could transform not just how humans move, but how they think, work, and relate to each other and the world. The airplane shrank distances, connected cultures, changed warfare, enabled new forms of business, and altered human perception of the planet. Few inventions have had such wide-ranging effects on so many aspects of human experience. As the 20th century progressed, aviation became increasingly intertwined with another revolutionary technology, one that would change not physical movement, but the movement of information. While airplanes were connecting people and places physically, A new kind of network was beginning to emerge that would eventually connect minds and ideas across those same vast distances at the speed of light. The age of flight was about to be joined by the age of information, as the foundations were laid for what would become the internet. In a quiet laboratory at the University of California, Los Angeles on October 29, 1969, a graduate student named Charlie Klein sat before a computer the size of a small car. He was attempting something never done before, sending a message to another computer at the Stanford Research Institute, over 350 miles away. The system crashed after he typed just two letters, L and O. He was trying to type L again. An hour later, after adjustments were made, the full message went through. This humble exchange, hardly noticed by the world at large, marked the birth of what we now call the internet. Like Edison's light bulb and the Wright brothers' first flight, this seemingly small technical achievement would grow into something that would transform human civilization in ways its creators could never have imagined. This first connection formed the beginning of ARPANET, a project funded by the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA of the United States Department of Defense. The goal was practical, to allow computers at different research institutions to share resources and information. Few involved in the project could have foreseen that they were laying the groundwork for a global system that would one day connect billions of people, reshape economies, transform cultures, and change how humans interact with each other and the world. The origins of the internet lie in the tensions of the Cold War. After the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the United States created ARPA to ensure American technological superiority. By the 1960s, ARPA was funding computer research at universities and think tanks across the country. Computers at this time were enormous, expensive machines, each costing millions of dollars. The idea of networking these computers emerged partly as a way to share these costly resources more efficiently. But there was also a strategic military dimension. Traditional communications networks were vulnerable. If a key node was destroyed, the entire system could fail. In 1962, an ARPA researcher named J.C.R. Licklider envisioned what he called a galactic network of computers that could talk to each other. Another ARPA scientist, Paul Baran, developed the concept of packet switching, breaking data into small chunks that could travel independently through a network and reassemble at their destination. This approach would allow messages to route around damage, creating a communications system that could survive even a nuclear attack. The technical challenge was enormous. Different brands of computers couldn't communicate with each other. They used different programming languages, different data formats, and different operating systems. A team led by Robert Taylor and Larry Roberts at ARPA decided to solve this by creating small computers called interface message processors, MPs, that would act as translators between different machines. The first four nodes of ARPANET, at UCLA, Stanford, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah, were connected by these AMPs. By 1971, ARPANET had grown to 15 nodes, and users were discovering its potential beyond resource sharing. Email was developed, allowing researchers to send messages to each other through the network. Soon, this became the most popular use of ARPANET. People wanted to communicate with other people, not just share computer resources. The human element was already beginning to shape the technology in unexpected ways. Throughout the 1970s, other computer networks emerged, each using different technical standards. A key breakthrough came with the development of Transmission Control Protocol, Synternet Protocol, TCP/IP, by Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn in 1974. This created a common language that would allow different networks to connect to each other, an Internet of Networks. By 1983, ARPANET had fully switched to TCP/IP, setting the standard that would enable global expansion. As these technical foundations were being laid, something remarkable was happening to the culture around networked computing. While ARPANET had military funding, the engineers and scientists building it were largely academics who valued openness, collaboration, and free exchange of information. They created systems for making decisions through rough consensus rather than top-down control. Technical standards were published openly, so anyone could implement them. This culture of openness became embedded in the Internet structure and would later enable its explosive growth. The 1980s saw the Internet begin to expand beyond military and academic settings, but it remained largely the domain of technical specialists. Using the early Internet required knowledge of complex commands and protocols. Email addresses were complicated strings that needed precise typing. Finding information meant knowing exactly where to look. There were no search engines or easy navigation tools. The internet was powerful but far from user-friendly. Then came a series of innovations that would open the door to wider adoption. In 1989, a British computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee, working at CERN in Switzerland, proposed a system for linking documents across the internet through hypertext, text that could connect directly to other text. He called it the World Wide Web. By 1991, he had created the first web browser and web server, built on principles of simplicity and accessibility. Unlike previous internet tools, the web was designed to be easy for non-technical people to use and to work across different computer systems. The early 1990s saw a surge in commercial interest in the internet. The National Science Foundation, which had taken over much of our planet's infrastructure, lifted restrictions on commercial use of the network in 1991. The first commercial internet service providers emerged, allowing ordinary people to connect from their homes using telephone modems. A new generation of user-friendly web browsers like Mosaic 1993 and Netscape Navigator 1994 made the web accessible to anyone who could point and click a mouse. By 1995, the World Wide Web had captured the public imagination. Mainstream media began covering cyberspace and the information superhighway. Companies rushed to create websites and stake their claim in this new frontier. The first major internet companies, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, were founded. Internet users could now shop, search for information, and connect with others through forums and early social platforms. What had begun as a military research project had evolved into a public space for commerce, communication, and culture. The late 1990s saw explosive growth in internet adoption, particularly in developed countries. Schools, libraries, and households connected in growing numbers. Internet cafes opened in cities around the world, providing access to those without home computers. Email became a common form of business and personal communication. Websites proliferated, covering every imaginable topic from serious academic research to the most niche hobbies and interests. This period also saw the first internet boom and bust. Investors poured money into any company with .com in its name, creating a speculative bubble that peaked in early 2000 before collapsing spectacularly. Many early internet companies failed, but the infrastructure and user base continued to grow despite the economic fallout. The internet was becoming too fundamental to daily life to be derailed by market fluctuations. The early 2000s brought significant technical advances that expanded what was possible online. Broadband connections replaced slow dial-up modems in many homes, enabling audio and video streaming. Wi-Fi technology freed internet access from physical cables, allowing people to connect from coffee shops, parks, and airports. Mobile phones began incorporating internet access. Though early mobile web experiences were limited by small screens and slow connections, this era also saw the rise of user-generated content. Blogs gave individuals their own publishing platforms. Wikipedia, launched in 2001, showed the power of collaborative creation. YouTube, founded in 2005, allowed anyone to share videos worldwide. Social networks like Friendster, MySpace, and then Facebook created new ways for people to connect and share their lives online. The internet was becoming less something people visited and more something they actively contributed to and participated in. By the 2010s, smartphones had become powerful enough to provide full internet experiences. The iPhone, introduced in 2007, and subsequent Android devices turned the internet into a constant companion for billions. Apps replaced websites as the primary way many people accessed online services. Cloud computing moved storage and processing from individual devices to massive data centers, allowing even simple mobile devices to perform complex tasks by connecting to remote servers. Social media platforms grew into global phenomena, with Facebook reaching billions of users. They became primary news sources, communication channels, and community spaces for many. They also revealed the internet's power to influence human behavior, spread information and misinformation, and shape public discourse. The optimistic view of the internet as an inherently democratizing force began to be tempered by recognition of its potential for amplifying division, enabling surveillance, and concentrating power in new ways. E-commerce transformed retail, with online shopping growing from a novelty to a fundamental part of the economy. Traditional businesses struggled to adapt as internet-native companies changed consumer expectations around convenience, selection, and price. Physical stores closed while massive warehouses and delivery networks expanded. The way products were advertised, sold, and distributed underwent revolutionary change in just a few decades. The internet's impact on information access and education was equally profound. Knowledge that once required access to major libraries or expert consultations became available to anyone with an internet connection. Online courses allowed people to learn from top institutions regardless of location. Scientific journals, historical archives, and cultural collections were digitized and shared globally. Information became more abundant than at any time in human history, though the quality and reliability of that information varied enormously. Communication was transformed at both personal and global scales. Families separated by oceans could video chat in real time for minimal cost. Long-distance relationships became more sustainable. Diaspora communities maintained stronger connections to their homelands. At the same time, movements and ideas could spread across borders at unprecedented speed. Political protests, cultural trends, and social movements developed global dimensions through internet connections. Work patterns shifted as remote collaboration became more feasible. Organizations could coordinate across time zones and continents. Freelance and gig work expanded through online platforms. New job categories emerged around digital creation, online marketing, data analysis, and platform management. Traditional industries incorporated internet technologies into their operations, from agriculture using connected sensors to monitor crops to construction using building information modeling. For all its global reach, the internet did not spread evenly. A digital divide emerged between those with fast, reliable connections and those with limited or no access. This divide existed between countries, between urban and rural areas, and between economic classes. As more essential services moved online, from government benefits to job applications to educational resources, this inequality of access became increasingly problematic for those left behind. The psychological impact of internet connectivity proved complex and far-reaching. People gained unprecedented ability to find others who shared their interests, values, or experiences, no matter how uncommon. This created valuable support communities for those with rare medical conditions, niche hobbies, or marginalized identities, but it also enabled the formation of harmful groups organized around extremism or dangerous behaviors. The constant connectivity could support meaningful relationships, but also create addictive patterns of use and attention fragmentation. Privacy concerns grew as the internet evolved. The early internet had a degree of anonymity that diminished as commercial interests developed sophisticated tracking and data collection systems. Every search, click, and interaction became potential data to harvest. Facial recognition, location tracking, and other surveillance technologies raised questions about the balance between convenience and privacy. The internet was revealing itself to be not just a communication tool, but also a vast system for monitoring and influencing human behavior. Meanwhile, the technology itself continued advancing. Artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms became more sophisticated, powering everything from search engines to content recommendation systems to voice assistants. The Internet of Things connected everyday objects, thermostats, refrigerators, cars, to the global network. Virtual and augmented reality promised new ways of experiencing digital content. Blockchain technology suggested possibilities for decentralized control of online systems. By the 2020s, the internet had become so deeply embedded in daily life that its absence was more notable than its presence. When connections failed, work stopped, communication faltered, and many basic services became inaccessible. The COVID-19 pandemic further accelerated this dependence, as remote work, distance learning, telemedicine, and online shopping became essential rather than optional for many. The internet proved its resilience and importance during this global crisis, enabling continuity in education, business, and social connection when physical proximity became dangerous. Looking back from this vantage point, the transformation brought by the internet rivaled or exceeded those of electricity and aviation. The light bulb had extended human activity beyond daylight hours. The airplane had connected distant places physically. The internet did something more profound. It created a global nervous system that transmitted ideas, emotions, knowledge, and culture at the speed of light. It changed not just what humans could do, but how they thought, formed communities, and understood their place in the world. For individuals, the internet brought both liberation and constraint. It offered access to knowledge, connections, and opportunities once available only to the privileged few. It gave voice to those historically silenced and platforms to creators outside traditional gatekeeping systems. Yet it also created new pressures: the expectation of constant availability, the social performance of online personas, the information overload of trying to keep up with an ever-accelerating flow of content. For societies, the internet challenged traditional boundaries and authorities. National borders became more permeable to ideas, though governments found ways to reassert control through censorship and surveillance. Institutional authorities faced competition from crowdsourced knowledge and direct communication channels between leaders and public. Cultural traditions both spread more widely and faced faster erosion through global exposure. The pace of social change accelerated as new ideas could propagate more rapidly than ever before. For economies, the internet created enormous wealth while disrupting established patterns. Tech giants rose to become among the most valuable companies in history, concentrating economic power in new ways. Traditional industries were forced to transform or decline. Labor markets shifted as automation and global competition reshaped what skills were valued. Intellectual property systems struggled to adapt to an environment where perfect digital copies could be created and shared instantly. For governance, the internet posed novel challenges. Laws written for physical space struggled to address online behavior that crossed jurisdictions effortlessly. New forms of crime emerged in digital realms. Questions of who should control critical internet infrastructure and who should make rules for online speech became increasingly contentious. The internet's design had emerged from technical decisions, but these now had profound political implications. The transformative journey from those first two letters, IL and O, transmitted in 1969 to the ubiquitous global network of the 2020 CES, happened with remarkable speed. Many people alive today remember a world without the internet, yet can barely imagine functioning without it now. The change happened so quickly that social norms, legal systems, and human psychology are still adapting to its implications. What makes the internet distinctive among transformative technologies is its malleability. The light bulb and aeroplane, for all their impact, remained recognizable as they evolved. The internet, in contrast, has continuously reinvented itself, from a research network to the World Wide Web, to social media, to mobile computing, to the emerging realms of artificial intelligence and virtual reality. It is less a single technology than a platform for continuous innovation, each layer building upon and sometimes transforming what came before. Through all these changes, the internet has maintained its core nature as a decentralized network with no single controlling authority. Despite attempts by governments and corporations to assert control over portions of the system, the fundamental architecture remains distributed. Information flows through multiple paths. Innovation can emerge from anywhere. This structural resilience has enabled the internet to survive and thrive through decades of political, economic, and technological change. Looking forward, the internet continues to evolve. Efforts to expand access seek to connect the billions still offline. Quantum computing threatens to revolutionize network security. Brain-computer interfaces suggest possibilities for more direct connection between human consciousness and digital systems. The concept of the metaverse envisions more immersive and persistent online worlds. Artificial intelligence promises to make online systems more responsive to human needs while raising new questions about autonomy and control. What began as a way for distant computers to share resources has become the most powerful tool for human connection ever created. The internet allows us to transcend the limitations of physical space, collaborate across vast distances, access the collective knowledge of humanity, and form communities based on shared interests rather than geographic proximity. It has become a mirror reflecting both the best and worst aspects of human nature, our creativity and cruelty, our wisdom and foolishness, our desire to connect, and our impulse to divide. As we continue to shape this technology and be shaped by it, we are still in the early chapters of the internet age. The full story of its impact on human civilization is still being written with every connection made, every message sent, every innovation developed on its global platform. From two letters transmitted between universities to billions of daily interactions spanning the planet, the internet's journey reflects humanity's remarkable ability to create tools that transcend their original purposes and transform the world in ways both intended and unexpected. While the internet was revolutionizing how information moved and people connected, Another transformation was unfolding in how physical goods were created and distributed. The technology that had made the automobile affordable to millions and changed manufacturing forever was about to influence nearly every product in the modern world. As bits flowed through the internet's digital pathways, atoms were being assembled with unprecedented efficiency on the assembly lines that were reshaping the global economy and everyday life. On a cold winter morning in 1913, workers arrived at the Highland Park Ford plant near Detroit to find their workplace transformed. Instead of gathering around stationary automobile frames as they had done for years, they discovered a strange new arrangement. A crude conveyor system made of wooden planks had been installed overnight. As they watched in surprise, the first Model T chassis began to move slowly along this track. Rather than walking around a static car, building it piece by piece, each worker would now stay in one spot, performing a single task as the vehicle passed by. What seemed like a simple change in workflow would prove to be one of the most consequential innovations in human history. The modern assembly line was born. Henry Ford had not invented the basic concept of an assembly line. Throughout history, humans had sought more efficient ways to make things. Ancient Romans had created specialized workshops for producing pottery and weapons. Medieval guilds had divided labor among masters, journeymen, and apprentices. Arsenals in Venice had built ships using standardized parts and sequential construction as early as the 1500s. Even in the American system of manufacturing, developed in the early 1800s for producing firearms with interchangeable parts, we can see precursors to Ford's innovation. What made Ford's version revolutionary was its scale, its speed, and its comprehensive reorganization of human labor. By breaking down the complex process of building an automobile into 84 distinct steps, assigning each worker to master just one of these steps, and bringing the work to the worker rather than the worker to the work, Ford achieved stunning results. Before the assembly line, it took about 12.5 hours to build a Model T. After its implementation and refinement, this dropped to just 93 minutes. Production soared from 82,388 Model Ts in 1912 to 585,388 in 1916. The cost of the car dropped from $850 to $360, making automobile ownership possible for millions of ordinary Americans. Ford himself was an unlikely revolutionary. Born on a Michigan farm in 1863, he had been fascinated by machinery from childhood, dismantling watches to understand their mechanisms. After working as an apprentice machinist and later as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company, he began experimenting with gasoline engines and automobiles in his spare time. His early automotive ventures failed, but in 1903 he founded the Ford Motor Company, with the vision of creating a car for the common person, not just the wealthy elite who had exclusively enjoyed automobile ownership until then. The path to the assembly line began with Ford's desire for standardization. Early automobiles were essentially handcrafted, with parts made to fit each individual vehicle. Ford insisted on precise specifications so that parts would be interchangeable, allowing for faster assembly. This standardization was the necessary foundation for the assembly line. Without identical parts, the smooth flow of assembly would be impossible. Inspiration for the moving assembly line came from multiple sources. Ford engineers had observed the disassembly lines of Chicago meatpacking plants, where carcasses moved on overhead rails past workers who removed specific parts. Ford himself had seen conveyor systems in flour mills and canning factories. The company experimented first with assembling smaller components like magnetos on primitive assembly lines, before attempting the full automobile. When the complete chassis assembly line debuted in 1913, it was the culmination of years of experimentation and refinement. The impact on workers was immediate and profound. Instead of skilled craftsmen who understood the entire process of building a car, Ford now needed workers who could perform simple, repetitive tasks with precision and speed. Traditional skills became less valuable than the ability to perform the same motion hundreds of times per day without variation. Work became more accessible to the unskilled but also more monotonous and physically taxing. The pace was no longer set by the worker but by the relentless movement of the line. Recognizing both the difficulty of this new form of labor and his need for a stable workforce, Ford made another revolutionary move in 1914. He doubled wages to $5 per day, an unprecedented amount for factory work at the time, and reduced the workday from 9 to 8 hours. This $5 day made headlines around the world and transformed manufacturing labor. Workers could now afford the very products they were building, creating a new model of mass consumption paired with mass production. Thousands lined up outside Ford plants seeking these high-paying jobs, allowing the company to select the most productive workers and demand intense labor in return for the premium wages. The assembly line quickly spread beyond Ford and beyond automobiles. Manufacturers of everything from household appliances to processed food adopted and adapted the technique. The mechanization of production accelerated across industries. Specialized machines replaced human labor for many tasks, with workers increasingly tending to the machines rather than directly manipulating materials. The factory became a finely tuned system where human and mechanical components worked together in carefully choreographed sequences. This transformation went far beyond manufacturing techniques. It represented a fundamental shift in how humans related to the process of creation. For most of history, skilled craftspeople had guided materials from raw state to finished product, making decisions and adjustments throughout. They controlled the pace of work and could take pride in their comprehensive knowledge and skill. The assembly line inverted this relationship. Now the system dictated the pace, and workers became components in a process largely designed and controlled by others. The product was no longer the expression of an individual's skill, but the output of a collective system. For consumers, the results were revolutionary. Products that had once been luxuries for the wealthy became accessible to the middle and working classes. Automobiles transformed patterns of living and working, allowing people to live farther from their workplaces and facilitating the growth of suburbs. Household appliances reduced the physical burden of domestic labor. Radios, phonographs, and eventually televisions brought entertainment and information into homes. The material standard of living rose dramatically for millions of people in industrialized nations. The economic implications were equally profound. Mass production required mass consumption to sustain it. A new consumer economy emerged, fueled by advertising that created desire for an ever-expanding array of goods. Installment buying and consumer credit developed to help people purchase these products. Retail systems evolved to distribute the flood of new goods, with department stores, mail-order catalogs, and eventually shopping centers providing convenient access to an unprecedented variety of products. The assembly line also transformed business organization. As production scaled up, companies grew larger and more complex. Professional managers replaced owner-operators in many firms. Scientific management, pioneered by Frederick Winslow Taylor, applied systematic analysis to workflow, seeking maximum efficiency in every movement and process. Corporations became increasingly hierarchical, with clear divisions between those who planned the work and those who performed it. Financial capital became more important than ever, as the large-scale equipment needed for assembly line production required substantial investment. Not everyone celebrated these changes. Critics like Charlie Chaplin, whose 1936 film Modern Times satirized assembly line work, portrayed the dehumanizing aspects of mechanized production. Labor unions grew in response to harsh working conditions and management control, fighting for better wages, hours, and workplace safety. Intellectuals worried about the loss of craft traditions and the alienation of workers from their labor. Some saw in the assembly line a troubling metaphor for modern society itself, efficient but soulless, productive but unfulfilling. The assembly line continued to evolve throughout the 20th century. During World War II, American factories using assembly line techniques achieved astonishing production feats, turning out a new airplane every 5 minutes and a ship every day at peak capacity. This arsenal of democracy played a crucial role in the Allied victory, demonstrating the strategic importance of mass production capability. After the war, assembly line production spread globally as industrialization accelerated in more countries. The technique was refined with new technologies. Electric motors replaced steam engines, pneumatic tools supplemented manual labor, and eventually early automation began to appear. Toyota in Japan developed innovations like just-in-time inventory and quality circles, creating a more flexible and efficient version of the assembly line that would eventually challenge American manufacturing dominance. By the 1970s and 1980s, further changes were reshaping manufacturing. Robotics began to automate tasks that had required human hands. Computer systems allowed for more precise control of production processes. Global supply chains emerged, with components made in multiple countries coming together in final assembly plants. These developments built upon the fundamental logic of the assembly line, while transcending some of its original limitations. The social impact of assembly line production extended far beyond the factory floor. It contributed to urbanization, as workers concentrated near manufacturing centers. It accelerated the movement from rural agricultural work to industrial employment. It changed family structures as wage labor replaced family-based production. It altered the nature of skills and education, as formal schooling became more important than apprenticeship for many jobs. It even influenced how time itself was experienced, as the clock-governed rhythms of factory work replaced the seasonal patterns of agricultural life. Assembly line thinking spread to sectors far from its manufacturing origins. Fast food restaurants applied its principles to cooking and service. Medical care adopted aspects of assembly line efficiency in hospitals and clinics. Office work became more routinized and specialized. Even education began to show assembly line influences, with students moving through standardized curricula in age-based cohorts. The concept of breaking complex processes into simpler sequential steps performed by specialists became a dominant organizational paradigm. This way of organizing production also had profound environmental consequences. The efficiency of mass production led to greater resource consumption, as more products became affordable to more people. Energy use increased dramatically to power factories and the products they created. Waste from production and discarded products accumulated. The scale of human impact on the natural world grew alongside manufacturing capacity. At the same time, the resource efficiency of making many identical items often surpassed that of individual craft production, creating complex environmental trade-offs. For workers, the legacy of the assembly line has been mixed. The jobs it created lifted millions into middle-class prosperity, particularly in the mid-20th century when manufacturing wages were at their peak. It created employment for people with limited formal education or specialized skills. Yet the nature of the work itself remained challenging, physically demanding, repetitive, and offering limited autonomy. As assembly line jobs increasingly moved to regions with lower wages or were automated entirely, communities built around manufacturing faced painful transitions. The globalization of assembly line production created new patterns of international development and dependency. Countries industrialized in stages, often beginning with labor-intensive assembly work before developing more advanced manufacturing capabilities. Global inequality was reshaped as production moved across borders in search of lower costs and less stringent regulations. Nations competed to attract manufacturing investment, sometimes at the expense of worker protections and environmental standards. By the early 21st century, assembly line production had evolved far beyond Ford's original innovation. Flexible manufacturing systems allowed for greater customization without sacrificing efficiency. Advanced robots worked alongside humans in collaborative environments. Digital technologies enabled precise tracking and coordination of complex supply chains. Yet the core principle, breaking work into standardized sequential steps for maximum efficiency, remained foundational to how most physical goods were produced. The psychological and cultural impact of the assembly line may be its most lasting legacy. It embodied both the promise and the peril of industrial modernity, delivering material abundance through systems that sometimes diminished human agency and creativity. It raised fundamental questions about the purpose of work, the relationship between efficiency and fulfillment, and the proper balance between human needs and economic productivity. These questions continue to resonate as we navigate the transitions of the digital age. The tension between the assembly line's material benefits and its human costs has never been fully resolved. Consumers enjoy the affordable products it makes possible, while workers experience the challenges of its pace and repetition. Societies benefit from its economic productivity, while grappling with its environmental impact. Individuals appreciate the standard of living it enables while sometimes yearning for more meaningful forms of work and creation. This tension has fueled ongoing efforts to humanize production technologies, to harness their efficiency while mitigating their potential to alienate or exploit. From Henry Ford's wooden track moving Model T chassis to today's global manufacturing networks, the assembly line has evolved into one of humanity's most powerful and pervasive innovations. It fundamentally changed how we make things, but also how we live, work, consume, and think. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity in solving practical problems, while also serving as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of prioritizing efficiency above all else. Its legacy lives in every mass-produced item we use daily, from the cars we drive to the appliances in our homes to the devices we hold in our hands. As the assembly line transformed physical production throughout the 20th century, another revolution was taking shape that would bring elements of mass production to the realm of information processing. Building on the principles of standardization and efficiency pioneered in factories but applying them to calculation and data management rather than physical goods, a new technology was emerging in research labs and government offices, from room-sized machines processing census data on punch cards to powerful devices that would eventually fit in a pocket. The personal computer was about to open yet another chapter in humanity's relationship with technology, one that would combine and extend the transformative impacts of electric light, flight, the internet, and the assembly line in ways no one could fully predict. The endless steppes of Central Asia stretched like a sea of grass beneath a vast blue sky. In this harsh landscape where summer heat scorched the earth and winter winds cut like knives, a boy was born in the late 12th century who would grow to command the most feared military force the world had ever seen. His name was Temujin, but history would remember him as Genghis Khan, ruler of the largest contiguous land empire ever created. The story of the Mongol horde begins not with grand armies, but with survival. Life on the Mongolian plateau was brutally difficult. Nomadic tribes moved constantly with their animals, following seasonal patterns, living in round felt tents called jurs that could be assembled and disassembled within an hour. From their earliest days, Mongol children learned to ride horses, shoot bows, and endure extreme conditions. By age 3, they could sit confidently on horseback. By age 8, they could hit targets while riding at full gallop. This was not sport or recreation. It was preparation for a life where skill with bow and horse often meant the difference between eating and starvation. Temujin's early life embodied these harsh realities. After his father was poisoned by rival tribesmen, his family was abandoned by their clan, forced to survive on roots, wild fruits, and small game. The young boy learned quickly about betrayal, hardship, and the need for absolute loyalty. These formative experiences shaped his worldview and later military philosophy. Trust had to be earned, alliances had to be meaningful, and enemies had to be decisively defeated. What transformed these scattered nomadic tribes into history's most efficient military machine? The answer lay partly in Genghis Khan's revolutionary organization of his forces. Traditional Mongol society organized itself by family and clan loyalties. But Genghis broke this system, reshuffling warriors into units based on the decimal system. 10 warriors formed an arban, 10 arbans formed a jagun of 100, 10 jaguns created a mingun of 1,000, and 10 minguns constituted a tumen of 10,000 riders. This structure meant orders could flow quickly from the highest commander to the lowest soldier without being filtered through tribal politics or family interests. This military organization reflected something deeper about Mongol society under Genghis Khan. It was a meritocracy unlike any other of its time. Men were promoted based on their skills, loyalty, and accomplishments rather than their birth or tribal connections. A shepherd's son could rise to command thousands if he proved himself capable and faithful. This system created fierce loyalty to Genghis himself, as he became the central figure to whom all owed allegiance above clan or tribal identity. The heart of Mongol military dominance was their cavalry. Unlike the heavily armoured knights of Europe or the specialised units of other armies, every Mongol warrior was a lightweight, fast-moving horseman. Each soldier maintained a small herd of 3 to 5 horses, allowing him to switch mounts several times a day during campaigns and movements. While other armies might travel 20 or 30 miles in a day of hard marching, Mongol forces could cover over 100 miles, arriving at battlefields with unexpected speed that confounded their enemies. Mongol horsemanship went beyond simple riding skill. The deep connection between rider and horse allowed Mongol warriors to shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while at full gallop. Their specially designed composite bows, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, could pierce armour at distances of over 200 yards. When a Mongol army of thousands released volleys of arrows, the sky would darken, and death would rain down on their opponents before traditional armies could even close to fighting distance. The tactics employed by the Mongol forces showed a sophistication that military historians still study today. One favourite manoeuvre was the feigned retreat, where Mongol units would pretend to flee in disorder, drawing enemy forces into pursuit. As the enemy formation broke down in the excitement of apparent victory, the Mongol forces would suddenly wheel around, surrounding their now disorganized opponents before destroying them with arrows and close combat. Time and again, larger armies fell victim to this tactic, unable to resist the temptation to chase what appeared to be a beaten foe. Communication on the battlefield represented another Mongol innovation. Using a system of flags during the day and torches at night, commanders could coordinate complex maneuvers across distances that would have required messengers in other armies. Their battle discipline was unmatched. Units moved with precision according to predetermined signals, allowing them to execute complex flanking movements or sudden directional changes that left their enemies confused and vulnerable. Perhaps most terrifying to their opponents was the Mongols' use of psychological warfare. They understood that fear could be as powerful a weapon as any bow or sword. Before attacking major populations, they would often massacre the inhabitants of smaller surrounding settlements, allowing refugees to flood into the target city with tales of Mongol brutality. Cities that surrendered immediately might be spared. Those that resisted faced annihilation. Engineers, artisans, and skilled workers would be identified and sent back to Mongolia, while everyone else might be killed or used as human shields in the next battle. These were not random acts of cruelty, but calculated policies designed to minimize Mongol casualties by encouraging surrender. The empire's expansion began in 1206 when Genghis Khan united the warring Mongol tribes. Rather than resting after this achievement, he immediately turned his attention outward. The first major target was the Jin dynasty controlling northern China. Despite facing cities with massive walls and an enemy that outnumbered them more than 50 to 1, the Mongols prevailed through superior mobility, adaptability, and military intelligence. When confronted with fortified Chinese cities, the Mongols demonstrated another strength: their ability to learn and adapt. Having no tradition of siege warfare themselves, they quickly captured and employed Chinese engineers, learning to build and operate catapults, trebuchets, and other siege engines. They diverted rivers to flood cities or cut off water supplies. They spread diseases by catapulting diseased corpses over walls. No technological advantage remained exclusive to their enemies for long. After subjugating northern China, the Mongol war machine turned westward. The wealthy Muslim kingdoms of Central Asia fell one after another. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, jewels of Islamic civilization with their magnificent mosques and madrasas, were given the same choice as all Mongol targets: immediate surrender or complete destruction. Many chose poorly and paid with their blood. The slaughter at these cities was so complete that in some locations, according to reports, a horseman could ride through the ruins without his horse's hooves touching the ground. So covered was it with the bones of the dead. The famous Silk Road trading networks fell under Mongol control, and with them, access to goods, ideas, and technologies from across Eurasia. The Mongols did not merely destroy, they connected. Under their rule, merchants could travel from Korea to Poland in relative safety, protected by the Mongol Peace, or Pax Mongolica, which would eventually cover the largest contiguous land empire in history. The westward expansion continued relentlessly. In 1222, Mongol forces under the generals Jibei and Subutai embarked on a reconnaissance mission that turned into one of history's most remarkable military expeditions. With a force of about 20,000 men, they rode around the Caspian Sea, defeating armies many times their size. They crushed the Georgian kingdom and then annihilated a combined Russian and Cuman force at the Battle of the Kalka River. This was merely a scouting force, testing the military capabilities of these western lands before the main Mongol army would return years later. As they moved westward, the Mongols encountered increasingly different terrains and fighting styles. European knights, with their heavy armour and powerful charges, presented a new challenge. Yet the Mongols maintained their advantage through superior mobility and tactics. They would avoid direct confrontation with heavy cavalry, instead wearing them down with arrow fire, targeting their horses, and drawing them into exhausting pursuits before closing for the kill. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 did not halt the Mongol expansion. His son Ögedei continued the conquests, sending armies deeper into Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Cities like Kiev, Moscow, and Baghdad fell to Mongol forces. The devastation was so complete that some regions took centuries to recover their population levels and economic vitality. In 1241, Mongol forces under Batu Khan and Subutai invaded Eastern Europe, crushing Polish and Hungarian armies that had been considered among the finest in Christendom. The Mongols reached the Adriatic Sea and seemed poised to continue into Western Europe when news arrived of Ögedei Khan's death. The Mongol princes returned to Mongolia for the Kurultai, the council that would select the next great Khan, temporarily saving Western Europe from the fate that had befallen so many other regions. What made the Mongol horde so effective went beyond their innovative military tactics. Their administration of conquered territories showed remarkable pragmatism and adaptability. While they could be brutally violent during conquest, their actual rule was often characterized by religious tolerance, support for trade, and a meritocratic approach to governance. They adopted practices and technologies from conquered peoples, incorporating Chinese administrative systems, Persian literary traditions, and Arab mathematical knowledge into their empire. The Mongol military machine was supported by an equally impressive intelligence network. Before invading any new territory, they would send merchants and spies to gather detailed information about geography, fortifications, political tensions, and military capabilities. By the time the arrows began to fly, Mongol commanders often knew more about their enemies' weaknesses than the enemies themselves. The Mongols' legendary toughness stemmed from lives spent in one of Earth's harshest environments. Warriors could ride for days with minimal food and sleep. They could drink blood from their horses' veins when water was scarce. They endured extreme temperatures without complaint. This physical and mental fortitude gave them a crucial edge over settled peoples, accustomed to more comfortable lives. Equipment for both horse and rider was designed for maximum efficiency. The Mongol saddle, with its high front and back, provided a stable platform for shooting in any direction, including directly behind while at full gallop. Stirrups allowed warriors to stand while shooting, increasing power and accuracy. Their deel, a traditional kaftan-like garment, was designed to keep them warm at night and cool during the day, with special construction that prevented chafing during long rides. The legacy of fear left by the Mongol conquests cannot be overstated. For generations after their invasions, parents in Russia, Persia, and parts of Europe would quiet misbehaving children with threats that the Mongols would return. Cities would surrender at mere rumors of approaching Mongol forces. This fear was a strategic asset that multiplied the effective strength of Mongol armies. Yet, for all their military brilliance, the Mongol Empire contained the seeds of its own transformation. As they conquered settled urban civilizations, the Mongols themselves began to change. The sons and grandsons of steppe warriors became administrators, traders, and patrons of art and science. They built palaces instead of goals, wrote laws instead of living by unwritten steppe traditions, and gradually adopted many of the customs of the peoples they had conquered. The empire Genghis Khan founded would eventually split into four major khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the El Khanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. Each developed its own character, influenced by local traditions and challenges. The Yuan emperors became Chinese in their governance style. The El Khans eventually converted to Islam. The Golden Horde adopted aspects of Turkic and Slavic culture. What began as a purely Mongol enterprise evolved into something more complex and varied. This evolution demonstrated another Mongol strength, their remarkable ability to adapt. Unlike some conquerors who imposed their ways blindly on subjected peoples, the Mongols were pragmatic, taking what worked from each culture they encountered. This flexibility allowed their influence to endure long after their direct political control had waned. The military innovations of the Mongols had lasting impact on warfare across Eurasia. The emphasis on mobility, the coordination of different types of mounted archers, and the sophisticated command structures influenced military development from China to Europe. Future empires would study and adapt Mongol tactics, though few would match their speed and coordination on the battlefield. As the 13th century progressed, the world continued to feel the effects of the whirlwind that had emerged from the steppes of Mongolia. Kingdoms fell, cities were rebuilt, trade routes flourished under Mongol protection, and technologies and ideas spread along these routes as never before. Populations mixed as Mongol armies and administrators relocated peoples across their vast domains. The genetic legacy of the Mongols remains evident today, with an estimated 16 million men currently carrying genetic markers that likely originated with Genghis Khan and his male relatives. The Mongol conquests reshaped the map and altered the course of civilizations. They connected east and west as never before, facilitating exchanges that would have profound consequences for human history. While the Roman Empire had united the Mediterranean world, the Mongols connected regions that had previously had minimal contact, creating networks that would outlast their political control. This pattern of conquest, connection, and transformation would echo through subsequent centuries. Other empires would rise with their own fearsome military forces, developing new tactics and technologies of war. As the influence of the Mongols began to fade in parts of their conquered territories, a different kind of military machine was perfecting its approach to domination, one based not on lightning mobility, but on discipline, engineering, and the relentless advance of infantry formations that could conquer and hold territory for centuries. On the other side of the Eurasian landmass, the Roman legions were demonstrating that empire could be built in a very different way than that of the steppe nomads, yet with equally world-changing consequences. Long before the thundering hooves of Mongol horses swept across the Asian steppes, another military force had already perfected a different approach to warfare and empire building. While the Mongols conquered with speed and terror, this earlier force expanded through relentless discipline, engineering brilliance, and methodical progress. The Roman legions represented not the wild fury of the steppes, but the ordered power of civilization, creating an empire that would last for centuries rather than decades. The story of the Roman legions begins not with a single great conqueror, but with a small city-state on the Italian peninsula. Around the 8th century BCE, Rome was just one of many settlements competing for survival and influence. What distinguished early Romans was their adaptive approach to warfare and governance. From the Etruscans, they borrowed formation fighting techniques. From the Greeks, they learned about phalanx warfare. But it was their willingness to improve upon these borrowed methods that would eventually make Rome exceptional. The early Roman army mirrored the society it protected, a citizen militia where wealth determined your position. The wealthiest citizens who could afford the best equipment stood at the front of the battle line. Those of moderate means formed the middle ranks, while the poorest citizens served as skirmishers. This arrangement reflected the belief that those with the most property had the greatest stake in defending the Republic. A pivotal transformation began around 387 BCE, when Gallic tribes sacked Rome, revealing serious flaws in the city's defenses and military organization. The Romans, ever practical, did not dwell on defeat, but instead learned from it. They began a series of military reforms that would ultimately create the most effective fighting force of the ancient world. The most significant change came with the introduction of the manipular system, where the legion was organized into smaller, more flexible units called maniples, arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This formation allowed for greater tactical flexibility than the rigid Greek phalanx. If enemies broke through the front line, the second line could step forward to fill the gap. The maniples could maneuver independently, adapting to changing battlefield conditions in ways that previous formations could not. By the late Republic, further reforms under Gaius Marius created the professional legions that would conquer the Mediterranean world. Marius abolished property requirements for service, opening the ranks to landless citizens who would look to their general and the army for their livelihood and future. These career soldiers served for 25 years, developing skills and experience that part-time militia could never match. The standard legion now consisted of approximately 5,000 men, divided into 10 cohorts, each containing 6 centuries of about 80 men. This structure created a clear chain of command from the legion commander down to the centurions who led individual centuries. Unlike the Mongol system based purely on decimals, the Roman structure balanced mathematical precision with practical battlefield needs. The training regimen of a Roman legionary would seem brutal by modern standards, but created soldiers of unmatched discipline and endurance. New recruits spent months learning to march in formation, often covering 20 miles in 5 hours while carrying equipment weighing up to 60 pounds. They practiced with weapons for hours each day, developing skills through endless repetition. The wooden practice sword weighed twice as much as the actual gladius they would use in battle, making the real weapon feel light and nimble when finally wielded against enemies. Physical conditioning was relentless. Soldiers swam across rivers in full equipment, constructed practice camps at the end of exhausting marches, and engaged in mock battles that sometimes resulted in serious injuries or even deaths. The message was clear: training must be harder than actual combat, so that battle would feel familiar when it came. The equipment of a legionary represented the height of military technology for its time. The lorica segmentata, a segmented armor made of iron strips fastened with leather straps, provided excellent protection while allowing greater mobility than chainmail or solid breastplates. The iconic rectangular shield, or scutum, covered much of the soldier's body and, when interlocked with those of his comrades, created an almost impenetrable wall. The primary weapon was the gladius, a short sword designed for stabbing rather than slashing. In the crush of close combat, where there was little room to swing a longer blade, the gladius could thrust between shield edges or into exposed areas with deadly efficiency. Legionaries also carried two pila, heavy javelins thrown just before close combat. These weapons were ingeniously designed with a soft iron neck that bent upon impact, preventing enemies from throwing them back and making shields unusable if they became embedded. What truly distinguished the Roman approach to warfare was not just their fighting techniques, but their mastery of logistics and engineering. While other armies might be more fearsome in individual battle prowess, none could match the Romans in sustained campaigns that lasted years or even decades. The secret to this endurance lay in their systematic approach to warfare. Each night on the march, legionaries constructed a fortified camp according to a standardized layout. After a day of marching 20 miles or more, soldiers would dig ditches, erect ramparts, and set up tents in precise formations. No matter where they were, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of North Africa, the camp layout remained essentially the same. This consistency meant that soldiers could find their assigned positions even in complete darkness, creating efficiency and security. These temporary camps were miniature versions of the permanent forts that anchored Roman control in conquered territories. Built to standard designs with protective walls, headquarters buildings, barracks, and granaries, these forts became seeds of Romanization throughout the empire. Many grew into towns and cities that still exist today, their street plans sometimes still reflecting the original Roman layout. The road network constructed by the legions represented perhaps their greatest engineering achievement. Built to exacting standards with deep foundations, drainage systems, and durable surfaces, Roman roads allowed for rapid movement of troops and supplies. The famous saying that all roads lead to Rome reflected a practical reality. The 250,000 miles of paved roads throughout the empire created a transportation network unequaled until the modern era. Many of these roads remained in use for centuries after the empire's fall, some forming the basis for modern highways. Roman engineers also excelled at siege warfare. When confronting fortified cities, legions would construct massive circumvallation walls, completely encircling the target to prevent escape or reinforcement. They built siege towers to overtop defensive walls, battering rams to break through gates, and ballista, massive crossbow-like weapons to provide covering fire. Perhaps most impressive were their earthworks, where entire hillsides might be reshaped to provide access to otherwise impregnable fortifications. Water management represented another area of Roman engineering excellence. Legionary engineers constructed aqueducts that carried fresh water over vast distances, bridges that spanned previously impassable rivers, and drainage systems that transformed marshy landscapes into productive farmland. These projects not only supported military operations but also demonstrated to conquered peoples the practical benefits of Roman rule. The tactical formations developed by the legions showed sophisticated understanding of battlefield psychology and physics. The most famous was the testudo or tortoise formation, where soldiers created a box-like formation covered on all sides and topped by overlapping shields. This mobile shelter could advance under arrow fire or approach enemy fortifications with minimal casualties. The sight of a testudo advancing implacably forward despite enemy missiles had a demoralizing effect on defenders. During pitched battles, legions typically deployed in 3 lines, allowing fresh troops to replace tired fighters at the front. This rotation system meant that Romans could maintain combat intensity for much longer than opponents who committed all their forces at once. Commanding officers positioned themselves on high ground behind the formation, sending signals with trumpets and standards to coordinate movements across the battlefield. The discipline that made these complex maneuvers possible was maintained through a combination of harsh punishment and strong unit pride. Cowardice or desertion might be punished by decimation, the execution of every 10th man in a unit that had failed in its duty, with the survivors forced to carry out the killings themselves. Less severe infractions could result in reduced rations, extra duties, or corporal punishment. This strict discipline was balanced by the intense camaraderie developed through shared hardship and the distinctive identity of each legion. Each legion possessed its own eagle standard, a silver or gold eagle mounted on a pole and carried by a designated standard bearer. This was more than a mere symbol. It represented the soul of the legion, and its loss was considered the greatest disgrace possible. Soldiers would risk death to protect their eagle or recover one that had been captured. These emotional bonds created fighting units willing to hold their ground against seemingly impossible odds. The career of Julius Caesar demonstrated how a brilliant commander could leverage the capabilities of the legions to achieve stunning military success. During his conquest of Gaul from 58-50 BCE, the Caesar's legions defeated enemies that vastly outnumbered them, constructed engineering marvels like a bridge across the Rhine in just 10 days, and conducted campaigns in all weather conditions. His commentaries on these campaigns reveal the systematic approach that made such achievements possible: detailed reconnaissance, careful supply management, and innovative tactical adaptations to each new challenge. Unlike the Mongols, who conquered with overwhelming speed but often ruled lightly, the Romans conquered methodically and then transformed the lands they held. The legions did not simply defeat enemies. They rebuilt the landscape itself with roads, bridges, aqueducts, and cities. They established colonies of military veterans who spread Roman culture, language, and governance practices throughout the conquered territories. The legions served as the cutting edge of Romanization, the process by which diverse peoples across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East gradually adopted elements of Roman identity. Many conquered peoples eventually gained Roman citizenship, with some rising to the highest ranks of the army and government. The children of tribal leaders defeated by the legions might later command those same units, having been educated in Roman ways. As the empire expanded to its natural limits, the Atlantic Ocean in the west, the Sahara Desert in the south, the Arabian deserts in the east, and the Rhine and Danube rivers in the north, the role of the legions evolved. From conquest forces, they became border guards, maintaining a network of forts and watchtowers along the imperial frontiers. Their presence deterred small-scale raids and provided early warning of larger threats. The relationship between the legions and Roman society underwent significant changes over the centuries. During the Republic, soldiers were citizens first, temporarily serving the state. Under the empire established by Augustus, the military became a distinct professional class with its own values and interests. Increasingly, emperors rose from the ranks of successful generals, chosen by their troops rather than civilian authorities. Over time, the composition of the legions changed dramatically. In the early empire, legionaries were exclusively Roman citizens, predominantly from Italy. As citizenship expanded throughout the provinces, the legions drew recruits from Spain, Gaul, the Balkans, and beyond. By the later empire, units were often composed of men from the same ethnic background, with distinctive fighting styles and equipment that departed from classic Roman models. The late Roman army faced growing challenges from migrations and invasions along its borders, particularly from Germanic peoples being pushed westward by pressures from the Eurasian steppes. Ironically, some of these pressures came from distant consequences of Mongol expansion centuries later. The empire adapted by incorporating more cavalry units and lighter infantry, moving away from the heavy infantry focus of the classic legions. As the Western Empire weakened in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the legions increasingly included Germanic federale, allied troops fighting under their own leaders but in Roman service. The line between Roman and barbarian blurred as these units took on more responsibility for defending imperial territories. Many of the kingdoms that emerged after the Western Empire's fall were led by generals who had once served Rome. The Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, maintained more traditional Roman military structures for centuries longer. The Byzantine army, as historians would later call it, continued Roman tactical and organizational traditions while adapting to new challenges from Persians, Arabs, and Turkic peoples. Their cataphract heavy cavalry and professional infantry preserved elements of legion discipline and equipment into the medieval period. The military legacy of Rome extended far beyond the direct line of the Byzantine forces. Throughout the Middle Ages, military writers studied Roman manuals and attempted to recreate legion discipline and tactics. During the Renaissance, the recovery of ancient texts on military organization inspired new approaches to drill, fortification, and unit structure. Even into the modern era, military academies have studied Roman campaigns for lessons in strategy, logistics, and leadership. Roman influence on military architecture remained visible for centuries. The star forts of the Gunpowder Age, with their angular bastions and overlapping fields of fire, evolved from principles first developed by Roman engineers. Techniques for constructing temporary camps and field fortifications continued to reference Roman practices into the 18th and 19th centuries. The organizational legacy proved equally enduring. Modern military hierarchies, with their clear chains of command and standardized unit sizes, owe much to Roman models. The emphasis on engineering and logistics as essential components of military power reflects Roman priorities. Even the close relationship between road building and military expansion has parallels in modern approaches to power projection. Perhaps the most significant legacy lies in the Roman concept of military service as a path to citizenship and social advancement. For centuries, provincial recruits could earn Roman citizenship through military service, becoming part of the empire they had previously viewed as foreign. This model of integration through service has influenced many later states, offering a method for incorporating diverse populations into a unified political structure. As new powers rose and fell across Eurasia in the centuries after Rome's zenith, different military systems emerged to address changing challenges. Some, like the Byzantine forces, maintained direct connections to Roman traditions. Others represented radical departures, developing in response to new technologies, cultural values, and strategic necessities. Among these innovative military systems, one would combine elements of strict discipline, reminiscent of the legions, with the adaptive mobility of steppe warriors, creating an elite force that would help build one of history's most enduring empires. As the medieval world gave way to a new era of gunpowder and global empires, a remarkable military force emerged that would combine ancient discipline with revolutionary innovation. While the Roman legions had long since faded into history, and the Mongol horsemen no longer thundered across the steppes, their military lessons were not forgotten. In the lands where Europe meets Asia, a new power was rising that would create one of history's most elite fighting forces. The Ottoman Janissaries would help transform a small Turkish principality into a vast empire spanning 3 continents, bringing a new dimension to warfare and state power. The story begins in the aftermath of decline. By the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's eastern territories, had weakened significantly. Meanwhile, Mongol expansions had pushed various Turkic tribes westward into Anatolia, the peninsula that forms modern Turkey. Among these tribes were the Ottomans, led by a chief named Osman, who established a small state on the Byzantine frontier around 1299. From these humble beginnings would rise one of history's longest-lasting empires. The early Ottoman military relied primarily on Turkish tribal warriors and Ghazis fighters motivated by religious zeal to expand Islamic territory. These forces were effective for raiding but lacked the discipline and organization needed for siege warfare or holding conquered territory. The Byzantine cities, with their massive walls, descendants of Roman defensive engineering, presented a challenge that required a different type of soldier. The solution came from an unexpected direction, not from military tradition, but from a radical social innovation. In the mid-14th century, the Ottoman rulers implemented a system called devshirme, often translated as the collection or gathering. Under this system, Christian boys from conquered territories in the Balkans were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and raised to serve the Ottoman state. This practice, shocking by modern standards, created a force of warriors with absolute loyalty to the Sultan, having no family ties or local allegiances that might compete with their devotion to the empire. These collected youths underwent a rigorous selection process. Ottoman officials traveled through Balkan villages every few years, choosing the most physically fit and intellectually promising boys, typically between ages 8 and 18. The most exceptional recruits were sent to the palace school to be educated for administrative positions, while the majority entered military training to become janissaries. the new infantry force whose name derived from Yeniçeri, meaning new troops in Turkish. The transformation of these young Christians into elite Islamic soldiers involved intensive indoctrination and training. Their previous identities were systematically erased as they learned Turkish, converted to Islam, and absorbed Ottoman culture. Unlike the Mongol warriors born to the saddle or Roman citizens who volunteered for legion service, these boys had no choice in their fate, yet many would rise to embrace their new identities with fierce pride. Training for Janissary recruits emphasized absolute discipline and loyalty. The cause was organized as a form of military religious order, with barracks that functioned somewhat like monasteries. The men were initially forbidden to marry or own significant property, keeping them focused entirely on military service. Each order, or regiment, developed distinct traditions and symbols, creating powerful bonds among soldiers who had lost their birth families but gained brothers in arms. The white felt hats worn by Janissaries featured a holder for spoons, a symbol with practical and spiritual significance. It represented their shared meals from communal cauldrons, reinforcing unit cohesion, while also connecting to Hasi Bektash Veli, a mystic who blessed the early corps and whose Bektashi order maintained close spiritual ties with the Janissaries throughout their history. This mixture of military discipline and mystical devotion created warriors who fought not just for pay or conquest, but for a sense of sacred purpose. The Janissaries' military significance came from their unique combination of discipline and innovation. While mounted Sipahi cavalry continued to form an important part of Ottoman armies, the Janissaries represented a turning point in warfare as one of the first standing infantry forces to effectively incorporate gunpowder weapons. Initially armed with bows and arrows, by the 15th century they became experts with matchlock muskets, giving Ottoman armies firepower that few opponents could match. Their battlefield formations showed the influence of both Eastern and Western military traditions. They could form tight, disciplined ranks reminiscent of Roman legions when delivering volleyed fire, but also employed skirmishing tactics that would have been familiar to steppe warriors. This flexibility proved decisive in early victories against both European knights and Mamluk cavalry, opponents with very different fighting styles. Training with firearms was systematic and constant. While European armies often employed mercenaries with firearms experience, the Janissaries developed standardized loading and firing drills that maximized their weapons' effectiveness. They practiced maintaining steady rates of fire and coordinating with other units on the battlefield. Their expertise extended to artillery as well, with Janissary corps including specialized bombardiers who operated some of the largest cannons of the era. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 demonstrated the effectiveness of this new military approach. Sultan Mehmed II employed Janissaries as his elite shock troops, supporting them with massive artillery pieces that finally breached the ancient city's supposedly impregnable walls. The fall of this last remnant of the Roman Empire sent shockwaves through Europe and established the Ottomans as a major power. Following the conquest, the city was renamed Istanbul and became the magnificent capital of the expanding Ottoman realm. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, the Janissary corps expanded in both size and influence. Originally numbering just a few thousand men, by the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent 1520 to 1566, their ranks had swelled to nearly 40,000. This growth reflected their battlefield success but also created new challenges for maintaining quality and discipline. As their numbers increased, their elite status became harder to preserve, but their political power grew accordingly. The Janissaries lived in a world of strict hierarchy and symbolic tradition. Their daily life in peacetime centered around their barracks, where they continued training and performed ceremonial duties. Each regiment maintained its own distinctive traditions, symbols, and even cooking styles. The quality of a unit's soup became a point of pride and ritual significance, with soup cauldrons serving as rallying points in battle and symbols of unit identity in peacetime. Pay and privileges set Janissaries apart from other Ottoman subjects. They received regular salaries from the imperial treasury, supplemented by bonuses when a new sultan took power. They were housed in imperial barracks, fed from imperial kitchens, and clothed in distinctive uniforms that marked their special status. Over time, they gained additional economic privileges, including tax exemptions and the right to engage in certain trades during peacetime. The Ottoman expansion through the Balkans, Middle East, and North Africa relied heavily on Janissary infantry, working in coordination with other military elements. In the Balkans, they faced European armies still organized around heavily armored knights and growing numbers of mercenary pikemen. On the eastern frontiers, they battled Safavid Persia, whose Kizilbash cavalry fought in styles somewhat reminiscent of their distant Mongol predecessors. In North Africa, they helped extend Ottoman influence across territories previously held by various Islamic states and remnants of Byzantine provinces. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 demonstrated the height of Ottoman military effectiveness. Janissary firepower devastated Hungarian heavy cavalry, contributing to a decisive victory that left much of Hungary under Ottoman control for over 150 years. A key element in this success was the Janissaries' ability to maintain disciplined formation even when facing charging cavalry, delivering coordinated volleys of musket fire that broke the momentum of their opponents. Belgrade, Budapest, Baghdad, and parts of Yemen fell to Ottoman armies spearheaded by Janissary infantry. The empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna, becoming the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean and much of the Middle East. The Janissaries' reputation spread fear among enemies and inspired numerous attempts at imitation. European observers studied Ottoman military organization, seeking to understand the secrets of their success. At sea, specialized marine Janissaries served aboard Ottoman naval vessels, providing disciplined fighting forces during boarding actions, the decisive moment in Mediterranean naval warfare. They contributed to Ottoman naval domination under admirals like Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha, whose fleets controlled much of the Mediterranean during the mid-16th century. The Siege of Vienna in 1529 marked something of a turning point. Though the Janissaries fought with their usual discipline and courage, logistical challenges and early winter weather forced the Ottoman army to withdraw. This setback revealed limits to Ottoman power projection and sparked European innovation in military technology and tactics. Future confrontations would become increasingly challenging as European armies modernized their own infantry forces and artillery. The relationship between the Janissaries and the sultans they served was complex and evolving. Created as slaves of the sultan, the corps initially represented the ruler's most loyal instrument. Unlike hereditary nobles or local military leaders who might harbor their own ambitions, Janissaries theoretically existed solely to execute the sultan's will. Their barracks were positioned near the imperial palace, allowing them to serve as both elite soldiers and the sultan's personal guard. However, this proximity to power eventually transformed the corps from servants into kingmakers. By the late 16th century, Janissaries began to realize their political potential. Their concentrated presence in Istanbul, combined with their weapons training and unit cohesion, made them a force to be reckoned with in imperial politics. Sultans increasingly found themselves needing to placate the corps with larger bonuses and expanded privileges. The first major Janissary revolt occurred in 1589, when the corps demanded and received the head of an unpopular Grand Vizier. This established a dangerous precedent. Over the next 2 centuries, Janissary revolts would depose multiple sultans, dictate policy decisions, and generally constrain the power of the throne. The symbol of these revolts was the overturning of their soup cauldrons, a dramatic gesture indicating their refusal to accept their rations or orders. This political role came with significant social changes in the corps itself. The strict barriers that had separated Janissaries from civilian society gradually eroded. The prohibition on marriage was relaxed, allowing Janissaries to form families. The devshirm system became less systematic, with sons of existing Janissaries gaining preferential entry into the corps. By the 17th century, being a Janissary had transformed from a lifelong military vocation into something more like a hereditary social class, with military responsibilities and special privileges. These changes coincided with a decline in Ottoman military effectiveness relative to European powers. While the Janissaries had once represented the cutting edge of military technology and training, they increasingly resisted innovations that might threaten their privileges or traditional ways of fighting. European armies, meanwhile, underwent rapid development with new drill systems, bayonet tactics, and more effective artillery. The Ottoman-Habsburg Long War, 1593 to 1606, and the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699, revealed growing Ottoman military weaknesses. European armies had not only caught up technologically, but were beginning to surpass Ottoman forces in tactical flexibility and battlefield coordination. The second unsuccessful siege of Vienna in 1683, followed by significant territorial losses in the Treaty of Karlowitz 1699, demonstrated that the empire had entered a new and more challenging phase. Despite these setbacks, the Janissary corps remained a formidable fighting force through the 18th century. Ottoman armies still won victories and defended most of their territory effectively. However, the trend line was concerning to forward-thinking Ottoman officials. Military reformers began to advocate for modernization along European lines, including new training methods, updated weapons, and revised tactics. These reform efforts repeatedly collided with Janissary resistance. Having evolved from slaves of the state into a privileged military caste, the corps fiercely opposed changes that might diminish their status or require painful adaptation. When Sultan Selim III attempted to create a new European-style military unit called the Nizam-i-Sidid in the 1790s, Janissary revolts ultimately forced the abandonment of the project and contributed to the Sultan's deposition and death. The final chapter of the Janissary story came in 1826, when Sultan Mahmud II carefully prepared a decisive confrontation. After intentionally provoking a Janissary revolt, he was ready with loyal artillery units and other forces. When the Janissaries stormed into the Hippodrome of Istanbul, imperial cannons opened fire on their formations. This event, known as the Auspicious Incident, resulted in thousands of Janissary deaths and the official abolition of the corps after nearly 500 years of existence. The shadow of the Janissaries lingered long after their destruction. Their legacy included military innovations that had helped build an empire spanning 3 continents, cultural contributions to Ottoman society, and cautionary lessons about the dangers of allowing military forces to become autonomous political actors. The transition from revolutionary fighting force to conservative obstacle to progress contained important insights for future military organizations. In their rise and fall, the Janissaries illustrated broader patterns of institutional development. Created to solve specific military challenges, they evolved in response to changing conditions, eventually becoming something quite different from their original form. Their initial effectiveness stemmed from their unique combination of total loyalty, rigorous training, and innovative adoption of new technologies. Their later difficulties reflected the challenges of maintaining these qualities across generations, especially as individual interests began to diverge from institutional purposes. The Dev-Sherm system that supplied the corps with recruits represented one of history's most radical approaches to creating elite military units. By separating young men completely from their previous identities and immersing them in a new culture and value system, the Ottomans created soldiers with undivided loyalty to the state. This approach had parallels in other elite forces throughout history, from Spartan youth training to modern special forces selection programs, though few were as comprehensive or long-lasting. The Janissaries' embrace of gunpowder weapons demonstrated the importance of institutional flexibility in military effectiveness. Unlike some traditional military elites who resisted firearms as dishonorable or beneath their status, the Janissaries recognized and exploited the tactical advantages these weapons offered. This adaptability contributed significantly to Ottoman expansion during the 15th and 16th centuries, though ironically, the corps later became resistant to further innovations. The transformation of the Janissaries from slaves of the state to a self-interested military caste revealed tensions inherent in professional military organizations. Creating forces with sufficient power to defend the state inevitably raises questions about controlling that power and ensuring it serves its intended purpose. The challenge of maintaining civilian control over military institutions remains relevant in modern contexts, with the Janissary experience offering a compelling historical case study. Throughout their history, the Janissaries embodied dual aspects of standing armies. They were both protectors and potential threats to the states they served. This duality would reappear repeatedly in later military organizations across different cultures and time periods. As professional military forces became the norm rather than the exception, political systems had to develop mechanisms for harnessing their effectiveness while preventing the kind of political interference that characterized the later Janissary corps. As the 19th century progressed, the Ottoman Empire continued without its once elite infantry, attempting military modernization along European lines with mixed success. New threats and opportunities emerged as industrial technology transformed warfare at an accelerating pace. The age of mass conscript armies, railroad mobilization, and rapid-firing weapons would create military systems of unprecedented scale and destructive power. These developments would culminate in global conflicts that would draw in nations from every continent, including a new power that would demonstrate industrial warfare on a scale previously unimaginable. In the early hours of December 7, 1941, The peaceful Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor was shattered by the sudden appearance of Japanese aircraft. Bombs fell, torpedoes sliced through harbor waters, and within hours, much of the United States Pacific Fleet lay damaged or destroyed. Over 2,400 Americans lost their lives in the surprise attack. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress, calling December 7th a date which will live in infamy, and the United States formally entered the Second World War. What followed would be the most remarkable military mobilization in modern history, transforming a nation still recovering from economic depression into the most powerful fighting force the world had ever seen. The story of the U.S. Army in World War II is not merely a tale of battles won through superior firepower, though that certainly played a role. It is a story of industrial might, logistical wizardry, technological innovation, and the coming together of a diverse society for a common purpose. Unlike the Mongol horde with its lifetime horsemen, the Roman legions with their career soldiers, or the Ottoman janissaries with their childhood indoctrination, the American military would be built primarily from civilians, ordinary citizens who traded their factory uniforms, business suits and farm wear for olive drab uniforms. When Pearl Harbor thrust America into war, the U.S. Army stood at fewer than 200,000 active duty soldiers, ranked 18th in size among world armies, behind even Portugal. The National Guard added another 300,000 troops, but this force was woefully inadequate for a global conflict. Just 4 years later, over 8.3 million Americans would be serving in the Army alone, with millions more in other branches of service. This transformation represented not just a numerical expansion, but a fundamental reimagining of what an army could be and how quickly it could be created. The draft had actually begun before Pearl Harbor, in September 1940, as war clouds gathered over Europe and Asia. The Selective Training and Service Act, America's first peacetime draft, began the process of building military strength, but it was the shock of direct attack that truly galvanized the nation. Recruitment offices across America saw lines forming around blocks as young men volunteered by the thousands, not waiting to be drafted. From small farming towns to bustling cities, Americans answered the call to service. Training this massive influx of civilians presented talented challenges. New training camps sprung up across the country, often built in weeks rather than months. Fort Benning in Georgia, Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and Camp Pendleton in California expanded dramatically to accommodate the flood of recruits. Basic training was compressed into intense weeks of physical conditioning, weapons familiarization, and tactical instruction. Specialized schools taught everything from radio operation to parachute jumping, tank driving, to military intelligence. Unlike the carefully selected janissaries or the career legionaries of Rome, these citizen soldiers came from every corner of American society. The son of a banker might serve alongside a coal miner. A Harvard graduate could find himself taking orders from a former factory foreman. While segregation remained a reality, with African American soldiers typically serving in separate units, the Army nonetheless brought together Americans from vastly different backgrounds and experiences. The training philosophy reflected American pragmatism rather than ancient tradition. Instead of spending years creating perfect soldiers, as the Romans or Ottomans might have done, American military planners focused on teaching essential skills quickly, knowing that experience would complete the transformation from civilian to soldier. The emphasis was on initiative and adaptability, rather than blind obedience. This approach would prove advantageous in a war where frontline units often needed to make quick decisions without waiting for orders from distant headquarters. Equipment for this massive force required an equally massive industrial effort. The United States economy, emerging from the Great Depression, transformed itself into what President Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. Automobile factories converted to producing tanks and jeeps, refrigerator manufacturers made aircraft parts, typewriter companies produced rifles. This industrial mobilization created not just weapons but the thousands of support items an army needs, everything from boots and helmets to medical supplies and field rations. The scale of this production defied imagination. By war's end, American factories had produced over 86,000 tanks, 300,000 aircraft, 71,000 naval vessels, 2.6 million machine guns, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. The industrial output was so enormous that American equipment not only supplied U.S. forces but also supported Allied armies through programs like Lend-Lease. Soviet troops drove American trucks, British pilots flew American planes, and Chinese soldiers carried American rifles, all produced in what had become the greatest manufacturing effort in human history. Logistics, the science of moving and supplying military forces, became the secret weapon of the American war effort. Army created the Services of Supply, later renamed the Army Service Forces, to manage the staggering task of moving millions of troops and mountains of equipment across oceans and continents. Nearly 75% of Army personnel served in support roles rather than combat positions, reflecting the enormous infrastructure needed to keep fighting units in action. The Red Ball Express exemplified this logistical miracle. After the D-Day landings and breakout from Normandy, a fleet of nearly 6,000 trucks, many driven by African-American soldiers, formed a continuous supply line delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily to advancing Allied forces. Trucks ran day and night, their headlights forming a red ball of light that gave the operation its name. This logistics pipeline allowed combat units to maintain their momentum without pausing for supplies to catch up. Unlike the Mongols who lived off the lands they conquered, or the Roman legions who built permanent infrastructure as they advanced, American forces relied on temporary systems of breathtaking complexity. The Army built temporary ports, erected prefabricated bridges, and laid fuel pipelines across previously impassable terrain. When existing infrastructure proved inadequate, Army engineers created new solutions, often improvising with available materials in ways that would have impressed even Roman military engineers. The technological advantages enjoyed by American forces stemmed not just from industrial capacity, but from scientific innovation. Radar systems improved air defense and bombing accuracy. Proximity fuses made artillery more effective. Amphibious vehicles, like the DUKW, which could transition from water to land operations, revolutionized beach landings. The humble Jeep, officially the Willys MB, provided unprecedented mobility for infantry and officers alike, becoming an icon of American ingenuity. Aircraft represented perhaps the most dramatic technological edge. The P-51 Mustang fighter, especially when equipped with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, provided long-range escort capability that allowed bombers to strike deep into enemy territory. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator heavy bombers carried the war to German industrial centers. In the Pacific, B-29 Super Fortresses operated at altitudes and distances previously unimaginable, eventually delivering the atomic bombs that would end the war with Japan. American tanks, while not always technically superior to German counterparts like the Tiger or Panther, overwhelmed enemies through sheer numbers and reliability. The M4 Sherman, produced in quantities exceeding 50,000, became the workhorse of Allied armored units. Though German tanks might win individual duels, American manufacturing ensured that for every German tank destroyed, many more Shermans were available to take its place. American tankers grimly joked that the Sherman's main advantage was that 5 of theirs could be lost for every German tank, and they would still win through numbers. Communication technologies transformed battlefield coordination. Portable radios allowed units to maintain contact during rapidly evolving situations. Signals intelligence gave commanders insights into enemy movements and intentions. The SCR-300 backpack radio and the famous walkie-talkie SCR-536 enabled coordination at tactical levels impossible in previous conflicts. Every company commander could potentially communicate with supporting artillery, air support, or neighboring units, creating unprecedented battlefield awareness. Medical innovations saved countless lives. Blood plasma, which could be stored without refrigeration, allowed for battlefield transfusions far from hospitals. Penicillin, mass-produced for the first time during the war, dramatically reduced deaths from infected wounds. Mobile surgical hospitals brought advanced care closer to the front lines than ever before. The resulting survival rate, roughly 4 deaths per 100 wounded, compared to 8 per 100 in World War I, meant that more soldiers returned home despite the war's increased destructive power. The campaigns fought by this newly created army spanned the globe in a way no previous conflict had. American forces fought in North Africa, Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, and across the Central and South Pacific. They battled in deserts, mountains, jungles, and on tiny coral atolls. This global reach required not just military prowess but cultural and environmental adaptability on an unprecedented scale. In Europe, the American war effort began in North Africa with Operation Torch in November 1942. American troops, many seeing combat for the first time, struggled initially against experienced German forces at places like Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. These early setbacks provided harsh but valuable lessons that would inform later operations. By the end of the North African campaign in May 1943, American units had gained crucial combat experience and begun to develop the tactical proficiency that would serve them well in later campaigns. The Italian campaign, beginning in July 1943, tested American forces against challenging terrain and determined German resistance. Fighting their way up the mountainous Italian peninsula, American troops encountered defensive positions that would have impressed ancient Roman engineers. The slow, grinding advance through successive German defensive lines taught painful lessons about the challenges of attacking entrenched positions in difficult terrain. D-Day, June 6, 1944, represented the culmination of American military planning, industrial output, and strategic vision. The largest amphibious operation in history landed over 150,000 Allied troops on the beaches of Normandy. American forces landed at Utah and Omaha beaches, with the latter becoming a scene of terrible casualties as troops faced heavy German fortifications. By day's end, despite the losses, the beachheads were secured, and the liberation of Western Europe had begun. The subsequent breakout from Normandy demonstrated American mobile warfare at its best. General George Patton's Third Army advanced at speeds that would have impressed Mongol horsemen, covering as much as 75 miles in a single day at times. The liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, where American troops withstood Hitler's last major offensive in the West, and the eventual crossing of the Rhine into Germany marked key steps in the defeat of Nazi Germany. In the Pacific, American forces faced different challenges entirely. Island-hopping campaigns required specialized amphibious tactics and equipment. Marines and Army units stormed beaches at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and dozens of other islands, often facing fanatical Japanese resistance in dense jungle terrain or heavily fortified positions. Each island represented a stepping stone toward Japan itself, and each victory came at a heavy cost in American lives. The recapture of the Philippines held special significance for the American Army. General Douglas MacArthur, who had been forced to leave the islands in 1942 with his famous promise, "I shall return," led American forces back in October 1944. The subsequent campaign illustrated the combined power of American arms, naval bombardment, air supremacy, and ground forces working in coordination to defeat a determined enemy in challenging terrain. Strategic coordination with allies represented a crucial element of American success. Unlike the independent conquests of the Mongols or the largely self-contained Roman campaigns, American forces operated as part of a grand coalition. Coordination with British, Canadian, Free French, and other allied forces in Europe required diplomatic skill alongside military planning. In the Pacific, Australian, New Zealand, and eventually Soviet forces complemented American operations against Japan. The relationship with the Soviet Union proved particularly important and complex. American equipment supplied through Lend-Lease helped the Red Army recover from devastating early losses and eventually drive toward Berlin from the east. Meanwhile, American and British forces advanced from the west, creating a two-front war that stretched German resources beyond their breaking point. This Allied cooperation, despite political and ideological differences, demonstrated how modern warfare required diplomatic as well as military coordination. The final stages of the Pacific War introduced the most terrible weapon yet developed, the atomic bomb. After years of secret development under the Manhattan Project, these weapons were deployed against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. The decision to use atomic weapons remains controversial, but it reflected the American approach to warfare, using technological and industrial advantage to achieve military objectives while minimizing American casualties. Japan surrendered shortly thereafter, bringing the global conflict to an end. The human cost of this vast conflict defies easy comprehension. Over 400,000 Americans died in service during World War II, with many more wounded physically and psychologically. Yet compared to other major combatants, American losses remained relatively low. The Soviet Union lost over 20 million people, China perhaps 15 million, and Germany and Japan each several million. The American strategy of using technology, industrial might, and careful planning helped achieve victory while limiting casualties compared to what might have occurred in a more traditional approach to warfare. As peace returned, the American military did not disappear, as had often happened after previous conflicts. The emergence of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, America's former ally, created a new security environment that required sustained military strength. Many of the organizational structures, technological systems, and global presence established during World War II would continue into this new era, forming the foundation for American military power for decades to come. The post-war global American influence rested significantly on the reputation and capabilities demonstrated during the war. The Marshall Plan for European reconstruction, the occupation and democratic rebuilding of Japan, and the creation of international institutions like the United Nations and NATO, all stemmed from American leadership established during the conflict. Military power had translated into diplomatic and economic influence on a global scale. The legacy of the World War II Army extended far beyond military affairs. The GI Bill provided educational opportunities for returning veterans, transforming American society and the economy. Military technologies found civilian applications, from computers to aviation, plastics to medical treatments. The organizational techniques developed for massive military operations influenced business management practices. In countless ways, the wartime experience shaped America's post-war prosperity and global role. The demographics of American society itself were altered by the wartime experience. Women who had worked in defense industries gained new economic and social roles that would not be entirely reversed after the war. African American veterans who had served their country, often with distinction despite segregation, returned with strength and determination to secure full civil rights. The shared sacrifices and experiences of the war years created bonds across regional, ethnic, and class lines that would influence American identity for generations. Unlike the Mongol Empire that fragmented after Genghis Khan or the Roman Empire that eventually fell to internal and external pressures, the American moment in global affairs was just beginning as World War II ended. The military machine created for the conflict evolved into the foundation for America's Cold War posture and eventual emergence as the world's sole superpower following the Soviet Union's collapse decades later. The US Army of World War II thus represents more than just a successful fighting force. It exemplifies a particular approach to warfare and national power, one based on industrial capacity, technological innovation, mass mobilization of citizen soldiers, and complex logistical systems. Rather than creating warrior elites like the Janissaries or career soldiers like the Legionaries, the American system demonstrated that modern democracies could produce effective military power when circumstances required it, then return most of their citizen soldiers to civilian life when peace returned. In this approach, we can see both continuity and change in the long evolution of military organization. Like the Roman legions, American forces excelled at engineering and logistics. Like the Mongols, they valued mobility and striking power. Like the Janissaries, they embraced new technologies that transformed warfare. Yet the American model added distinctive elements: massive industrial production, scientific research, and the temporary conversion of civilians into an effective fighting force, followed by their return to productive civilian lives. As the mid-20th century gave way to new challenges and conflicts, these lessons and capabilities would be tested repeatedly. The American approach to military power would evolve further through the Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. New technologies from nuclear weapons to precision munitions, stealth aircraft to cyber capabilities would transform the battlefield yet again. But the foundations laid during World War II, the organizational structures, the industrial base, the global presence, and the relationship between civilian society and military power would continue to shape America's approach to security challenges for generations to come.